Good evening, and welcome to this special Mechanics of the Fourth Wall debate edition. Joining me tonight is Antonio Subarits and John Le Bon. How are you doing, gentlemen?
All good here.
And how are you doing, John?
He's muted.
Total silence.
John, you're muted.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine, John. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, mate. This is why we should have done a sound check before the start of the show. For the listeners' benefit, they should be aware this was all very last minute, wasn't it, Nathan?
Yes, this is entirely my fault. My wife thought she was going into labour, so we've literally just 2 minutes ago got back from hospital, set up the hangout and started, so that's why we're going to do this. So before we actually get rocking and rolling with the proper debate, have we actually come to a consensus on how the debate is going to be formatted?
I don't know, John, you didn't respond to my last email.
Okay, so again, for the benefit of the listeners, I first put through my proposed format to Nathan and to Antonio a few weeks ago, and I didn't get back a response regarding the format. And a few days later, just recently, I sent them another one proposing a format, a 6-session format, to which a few hours ago Antonio suggested that he wasn't very happy with it. And so since then we haven't had a chance to establish a proper format for the debate. So I'll throw it over to you there, Antonio. You tell me, what seems to be the best format in your opinion?
I think a combination of what you were thinking and what I was thinking.
Well, why don't you run us through what you think would be a good format, and then we'll see if we're all au fait with it, and if we are, we can get started.
Okay, so I will go into my email.
All right, so to save the dead air while Antonio's doing that, my suggested format involved an introductory section and then 2 rebuttal sections and then a question and answer, then an open discussion and then a concluding remarks section. So 6 sections: intro, rebuttal, Q&A, open dialogue, and conclusion. I thought the format made sense. It would have taken about 90 to 120 minutes. Would have worked out great for everybody. So maybe Antonio and Nathan can come to the party and tell us what's wrong with my format.
Well, maybe, John, you can...
I'm cool with both of you being happy. That's all I'm after here.
Okay, good. So this is... John, did you not need to read my email?
I read your email a few hours ago, yes.
Oh, okay.
I woke up this morning.
Okay,
yeah.
So... let's meet halfway, was my response. A 5-minute break prior to the question and answer session should allow for fine-tuning of questions. The question time is not a time to grandstand, John, and should be kept to direct questioning. Moderators should step in to ensure each stays on point. Each question should take no more than 2 minutes. Answer should be 2 to 3 minutes. Number of questions should be agreed on the break. The question must be answered. Once that has been covered, an open debate, criticizing each other's argument, style, whatever. So, how does that suit you?
Yes, that doesn't sound too different in terms of what I suggested. So are you happy with an introduction section of maybe 10 or 15 minutes and then 2 rebuttal sections after that?
Sure.
And then in the Q&A, you want a 5-minute...
How long do you want the rebuttals to be? That was the other burning contention.
So I suggested in the email that I sent you to that the rebuttals should be about 10 minutes long each, and the rebuttals should be sticking to the points brought up by the other party in their introduction and rebuttal. So you can't rebut points that the other party hasn't made. So for instance, if Antonio didn't make any reference to the Arctic zigzag sun argument, I couldn't rebut him on it because it's not his point. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Sure.
So introduction, we both get to make our opening remarks. Rebuttal, we then respond to what the other has said. Then second rebuttal, we both get to respond to what's being said. That's basically the first half of the debate format that I proposed. Then the Q&A, it sounds like Antonio's main concern, he doesn't want any handstanding, to use his terminology. That's fine by me. So we can have a 5-minute break. Then we can go through the question and answer. Shouldn't take more than a couple of minutes to ask a question. Shouldn't take more than a couple of minutes to answer a question. Get through as many as we can. Then I suggested an open dialogue back and forth. If Antonio wants to omit that from the debate, that's fine, but I think that's probably going to be the most exciting part of the debate. And then concluding remarks. So I'll leave it.
Yeah, like I said in the email, after the question and answer, then open debate. Yeah, which will be the most fun part. So, yeah, why not?
Great. Well, as it's exactly the top of the hour,
yes.
I mean, just so I'm clear, we've got introduction times 2, 15 minutes each, 2 rebuttal sections of around 10 minutes each, a Q&A, and then open debate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
sounds
happy
good.
with that, John? Rock and roll. Right. I suppose we should decide who's going first. Is anybody going to go volunteer, or shall I dig out a coin?
I'll let Antonio go first or second, up to him.
Okay, so Nathan, if you will toss a coin, let the fates decide.
Okay. Call Antonio, heads or tails?
Tails.
You lost.
Oh, come on.
You get to choose first or
do
second.
it on camera.
Just have to take my word for it. Right,
Yeah.
JLB, you get to choose. Do you want to go first or second?
Well, since Antonio is arguing in the affirmative, I think it's probably best that he goes first.
Okay, fair enough.
Perfect. Well,
Now, one more thing before we get started. One more thing before we get started, up to you two. We can either do our brief introductory bio as part of our intro, or we can both just give the listeners who aren't already aware a background on who we are before we get started. It's up to you two.
Not really relevant, is it?
I don't think so. I mean, if you want to do that, then fine. Personally, I'd rather get straight into it.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
But then I can shut up. I'd rather do that because then I can sit back and say nothing.
Okay.
Right, Antonio then.
Okay.
Ready when you are. Go ahead.
Oh, so screen sharing, aren't we? To illustrate points. Okay. Let me set up the screen share so it goes to everybody. What's happening? Nathan, it's not screen sharing.
Are you you're not screen sharing with me as yet?
Or with anybody.
Doesn't look like you're screen sharing yet.
Oh, okay. How about to pass you the links and you share them?
I can do. How are you screen sharing? Because literally, neither of us have got anything at this stage.
There's nothing. So what I will do is I will pass you the links in the chat here. Excuse everybody. This is due to Braxton Hicks contractions, girls, mothers out there.
So yeah, stick me whatever link you like in the chat, Antonio, and I'll stick it up.
Yes. Okay, doke. And apologies to John as well. There's the first. We should have done all this before going live, shouldn't we? To spare.
This is entirely my fault. So everyone can blame me.
Yeah, it's okay.
Neither of the two debating parties. Right. Okay. So I'm ready to screen share this. Bear with me.
Wait. No. Don't screen. Just have them there, Nathan. Don't screen share.
Okay. No worries.
Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm just passing them to you, and then you can screen share as and when.
Sure.
Okay. Second. Third. Fourth. Unfortunately, there are a couple of pretty important things that I'm not going to be able to screen share, but never mind. Oh, JLB's gone. Okay.
He should turn his camera off temporarily. Okay, Antonio, are you ready?
So, yes, and we can't freaking screen share. That's poo. Anyway, okay, I'm set.
Okay, Antonio, 10 seconds and I'll start the clock again as you can't screen share. So it's 4 minutes past the hour according to my watch. So your 15 minutes starts now. The mic's all yours.
Okay, so will you share the definition of dichotomy?
Okay.
No, dichotomy, that's cynic.
This is what I've got from you so far.
Okay, I've just passed you another one. Sorry, it's in the link. It's in the chat, the last one I sent.
Nope, that's this.
Oh. Right. What the? Okay. So do you want to stop screen sharing? Okay, never mind. So dichotomy is a division into two mutually exclusive or contradictory subjects. So flat and static versus spherical and spinning. That, John Le Bon, is a dichotomy. It is not a false dichotomy. Now, flatness can be shown and proven. The globe can't. The Bolivian salt flats, 80 miles long, showing less than 3 feet difference between one point and the other. So this is quite a generous margin of error, considering it should be 4,285 feet. So that's 4,282 feet of curvature missing, according to both geodesic and plane surveying. Thanks, Bob. Now, gravity necessary for the globe. Big G, the gravitational constant, is not constant. See Rupert Sheldrake about this. The same with the speed of light. Now, we have for the globe Foucault's pendulum. But versus Foucault's pendulum, we have the Sagnac experiment, the Michelson-Morley, and Airy's failure. That's 3 to 1. 3 which can be done at home or in any university lab, 1 that can't, and 1 where the creator, Foucault, lied about his results with a gyroscope. Now, Nathan, if you would show deductive reasoning. No, you don't see it in the list. Okay, never mind. I'll describe deductive reasoning versus inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is where you have a series of general premises for a specific conclusion. Inductive reasoning is where you have specific premises for a general conclusion. So, for instance, with the globe, specific geometry, specific maths describing orbits for a general conclusion, okay, versus flat, general observations of lack of curvature for a specific conclusion. It's flat. Now, skeptic versus cynic. A skeptic is somebody who doubts what's being proposed, just on the basis of the merits of the words being spoken or the argument being proposed, if an argument is invalid or if it's weak. Now, a cynic is somebody who will doubt what's being proposed, not on the basis of the argument type, but on the basis of the inclinations of the person proposing the argument or positing the argument. That's a cynic, somebody who questions the motives behind somebody's argument. So some people think that flat earthers are there to promote a new worldview that's all an all-encompassing cult. No, flat earthers are there trying to expose and explain and describe things that would otherwise not come to light, okay? We're not gaining anything. In fact, what we do more than anything is lose respect from our so-called peers. Now, sails, going over the horizon last after the ship, okay? 2 people on a beach, you have a ship, and the person sees it, oh, it's gone beyond the horizon. Now his colleague has a telescope and looks at it and, oh no, it's there, okay? So it's gone beyond the horizon, but now it's back. That's lack of curvature, okay? Spain, not seen from the east coast of the US, is due to atmospheric blocking. I had a great picture here, but I can't show it. So you have, at certain days, you have New York visible from across the water. On other days, from the same distance, New York not visible. This does not mean that on the days when it is not visible, it is because it is beyond the curve, and the other days, the curve has relaxed a bit, okay? This is just straight atmospheric blocking. So looming is simply the sky reflecting on calm waters. So that's what looming is. The water is the same color as the sky, and it looks like the object, the ship, the pier, whatever, is floating. It is not actually higher than it would be if you saw the whole horizon and the whole of the water before there. I have a video to show, but so unfortunately it's not there. But that's what looming is. And sinking is when the light is simply reflecting from an inversion layer, hiding the land beyond or the object beyond. Now, Archimedes, who was born 10 years before the mythical Eratosthenes, used Euclidean geometry and water levels to determine the direction for a tunnel being excavated from 2 sides of a mountain to meet at the center, okay? Would this have happened without the curvature? No, don't think so, because Archimedes was a flat earther. That's why he said, you find me a big enough lever and a place to stand, and I will move the earth. You can't do that if the place to stand is in space, okay? He was a flat earther. So Another half-wit. Archimedes, what an arse. So also, aqueducts depend on straight declination, not spherical, not hump climbing declination, okay, which would make it exponential or would have to have valleys to slow it down. Instead, it is straight declination. Planes don't dip their noses to correct for curvature, and gyros show no curvature. Keep your eye on the horizon. Hence, planes don't dip their nose. They don't dip their nose because the gyro tells them not to. The gyro tells them not to because there is no curvature to correct for. Now, water is more fluid than land, and yet spin does not cause it to gather around the equator. Okay, which centrifugal force, which is admittedly a weak force or a non-force, dictates. Okay, so the water is not just around the equator. We're not spinning. So now, how the sun moves across the sky. I won't talk about the sun because we don't really know what it is or where it is, but I will talk about a plane, which can describe a very similar arc. An observer watching a plane fly at constant altitude from his horizon to his right and his horizon to his left. The plane goes across in constant altitude in a straight line. Now, the horizon is straight. The plane's path is curved. Why is this? Because we are making a 3-point triangle, like all triangles, between the observer, point A, where the plane arrives at the horizon, point B, where the plane goes behind the horizon. This is a triangle, okay? At the midway point, you have the plane's closest proximity to the observer, and the journey the plane makes is straight, level, but to the observer seems like an arc, okay? In fact, it is an arc to the observer. And that's it. I will use that any other time that I have. You're muted. Nathan, you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Antonio. That was wonderful. I don't know if JLB is going to pop back on, put his mic back on and such. Hopefully he's scribbling away furiously to getting a load of notes down.
Yep.
You're back with this, John.
I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you. Do you want to get straight into your introduction, my friend?
Yeah, thanks. So, yeah, apologies to the listeners for the problematic start there, but we're all good to go. So, let's get straight into my introduction then. Now, my opening statement will consist of 3 parts. Part 1 will cover the debate topic and what I hope to demonstrate. Part 2 will cover basic reasoning or logic and evidence, and how we evaluate claims. And part 3 will cover major problems facing flat earth theorists and their belief system. So part 1, the debate topic and what I hope to demonstrate. Now, the debate topic is very straightforward. The earth can be proven to be flat. Now, Antonio is arguing in the affirmative and myself in the negative. Now, this topic was agreed 2 weeks ago, and I expect that all 3 of us, the moderator, myself, and my opponent, will stick to the agreed topic. This is very different to some of the other debates which have taken place recently, whereas others have been set up as flat earth versus other models. Tonight's debate is all about the topic of flat earth. Now, the benefit of this topic is that it excludes the irrelevant and inconsequential arguments about the merits of heliocentrism theory, concave earth theory, hubcap earth theory, etc., etc. Now, if flat earth is a sound belief system, then it must be demonstrated to be so on its own merits. It is therefore Antonio's task to demonstrate that he can prove the earth is flat, and it is my task to demonstrate that he cannot prove the earth is flat. It is very important for listeners to understand the topic of the debate. It is not Antonio's task to debunk other theories or belief systems. His job is simply to demonstrate that the earth can be proven to be flat, and it's not my task to prove or defend other theories or belief systems. My job is simply to demonstrate that the earth cannot be proven to be flat. Now, I plan to demonstrate that the earth cannot be proven to be flat via 3 separate angles. The first angle is to establish that the flat earth so-called theory is not a theory in the scientific sense of the term, but is rather a belief system. Now, neither Antonio nor any other known flat earth opponent has produced a working model which can account for all relevant, observable phenomena of our earth and its heavens. Therefore, it cannot pass scrutiny via the scientific method and is not scientific. Now, first, it's important to understand the distinction between the scientific method and what is today known as science with a capital S. Although often confused, they are rather different. The scientific method is a straightforward approach by which knowledge of the physical world can be attained and or agreed upon. It involves observations, hypotheses, tests, and theories. Modern science, on the other hand, revolves around countless theoretical and abstract claims, many of which are not even testable empirically via the scientific method. So while people are quite right to dismiss modern science as quackery, much of it anyhow, and label it the religion of scientism, this does not mean the scientific method ought to be dismissed as well. Quite the contrary, much of modern science ought to be dismissed precisely because it fails to conform to the scientific method. Let me go on. Although the scientific method may be particularly useful for metaphysical inquiry, it is clearly the most practical approach for studying the nature of our physical reality. Therefore, insofar as proponents of flat Earth purport to be an objective explanation of our physical reality, it must conform to the scientific method. The scientific method requires that hypotheses, and therefore theories, be falsifiable. Without a working model, the flat Earth belief system cannot make hypotheses or predictions, and hence cannot be falsified. For example, the flat Earth belief system cannot predict where the Southern Cross constellation will appear in the sky for a given location at a given time. And as we'll see later in the debate, many prominent flat Earth theorists, including my opponent, cannot even agree upon which direction those stars are observed to rotate during the day. If they cannot agree on basic observations, there's no way they can construct relevant hypotheses, and without hypotheses, their so-called theory cannot be tested, and if it cannot be tested, it cannot be falsified. This is pseudoscience by definition. Flat Earth can therefore be accurately described as a belief system, the simple definition of which is a set of mutually supportive beliefs. Therefore, the best the flat Earth proponents can hope to do is infer that the Earth may be flat, not via the scientific method, but instead with various discrete arguments which, when taken together, may lead to the inference that the Earth may be flat. And if my opponent can provide enough sound arguments that lead to the inference that the Earth may be flat, some listeners may decide that is enough for them to adopt or maintain that belief system, even if it cannot be supported as a theory in the scientific sense. Therefore, the first angle will establish that the Earth cannot be theorized to be flat in the scientific sense of the term. At best, the flat Earth so-called theory can be considered a belief system. On to the second angle, which will examine separate arguments for the flat Earth belief system and consider whether or not they are supported by sound reasoning and compelling evidence. In doing so, I will show that few, if any, of the arguments put forward for flat Earth theory are supported by sound reasoning and compelling evidence. Some of their arguments are logically cogent or valid, but not supported by compelling evidence and are therefore not sound, whereas other of their arguments have premises which may be supported by compelling evidence, but do not actually lead to the conclusion, and so the arguments are logically fallacious and or invalid. That is, few, if any, of the arguments put forward by flat Earth believers actually pass a proper logic and evidence test. Therefore, the second angle will establish that the arguments put forward to infer that the Earth may be flat are not sound, either due to faulty logic or poor supporting evidence, or both. The third angle will explain that there are 5 separate problems which seem to contradict the flat Earth belief system. One of the main reasons why the leading flat Earth believers have failed to produce a working model is because of known phenomena of our Earth and heavens which don't seem to accord with any flat Earth model proposed thus far. Therefore, the third angle will establish that even if the flat Earth believers could produce sound arguments which might infer that the Earth is flat, they still not can account for the many major problems which are entailed by their belief system. And so, over the course of this debate, in a step-by-step process, I will demonstrate that, first, the flat Earth belief system does not include a working model, and therefore does not qualify as a scientific theory, but is rather a belief system. Second, the separate arguments put forward to infer that the Earth might be flat are faulty in logic and or lacking in compelling evidence. And third, there are 5 separate known phenomena of our Earth and heavens which contradict the flat Earth belief system. Now on to part 2 of my introduction, which is to do with basic reasoning or logic and evidence and how we evaluate claims. A general understanding of basic reasoning or logic and evidence is necessary to properly evaluate claims of any kind. Although it is beyond the scope of this debate to go into detailed explanation of basic reasoning, I will provide a brief overview to ensure that the things I say during this debate make more sense to the listener and my opponent. A worthwhile primer on this topic is my Thinking 101 series, which is posted on my backup channel, John LeBon Extra. Broadly speaking, there are a few key terms and concepts which are important to understand. Philosophically, an argument is a piece of reasoning designed to establish a conclusion. For instance, the water always maintains its level claim can be described as an argument. The standard form of an argument is how it looks when broken down into premises and a conclusion. A premise is a statement or proposition which is supposed to support the conclusion. If the premises do indeed support the conclusion, the argument is said to be cogent or valid. By analysing the standard form of an argument, we can establish whether or not the argument is reasonable, regardless of whether or not the premises are true. This is particularly useful in debate settings whereby evidence may not always be immediately available. We may not agree on the existence or value of certain pieces of evidence, but by focusing on the logic of an argument, we may be able to establish which arguments may be of use at a later time when the evidence becomes available. Now, some arguments may have true premises, but are yet fallacious in their form. For instance, some arguments are non sequiturs. The premises may be true, but they do not actually support the conclusion they are claimed to support. Some arguments may have premises which do indeed support the conclusion, but the premises themselves are not actually true or are not supported by enough evidence to be compelling. So by employing basic reasoning or logic and evidence, we can assess the soundness of each separate argument put forth in support of the flat earth belief system. Once my opponent has put forth his arguments, I will assess each one in two ways. First, I will determine whether or not the argument is cogent or valid. That is, does the conclusion even follow from the premises to begin with? I'll do this by breaking each argument down into standard form. Then, in the case of arguments which are logically acceptable, I'll consider whether or not the premises are supported by compelling evidence. And I'll do this by scrutinizing any evidence which is put forward in support of the argument. This will include asking my opponent for his evidence if he has any to offer. In other words, I'll scrutinize each argument put forward by my opponent, first by assessing whether or not it is logical, then by assessing whether or not it is supported by compelling evidence. Now, if any of my opponent's arguments can be shown to be both logically acceptable and supported by compelling evidence, then each of these arguments may be seen as giving support by inference to the overall flat earth belief system. It'll be up to each member of the audience to determine whether or not they believe each argument put forward by my opponent is logically acceptable and supported by compelling evidence. And in this sense, my main task in this aspect of the debate will be to elucidate precisely what each argument actually is, and the use of basic reasoning will be of great benefit in doing so. I expect that by assessing each flat earth argument in this way, objective audience members will be able to see for themselves that few, if any, of the arguments put forward are both logically acceptable and supported by compelling evidence. Again, it must be pointed out that even if a person believes that one or more of these arguments are logically acceptable and supported by compelling evidence, this will not be a proof that the Earth is flat, but rather an argument to support by inference the belief system that the Earth may be flat. And so I'll be applying basic reasoning or logic and evidence to my opponent's claims during the rebuttal section of this debate, and likely during other sections as well. Almost finished part 3 of my introduction, the major problems facing the flat earth theorists. There are a number of major problems facing flat earth proponents. These arise out of known, observable phenomena of our earth and the heavens above. They do not depend on speculation or faith, but on objective information which anybody can confirm for themselves empirically. Even if flat earth proponents could put forward one or more arguments from inference that the earth may be flat, the existence of these problems render the flat earth belief system irrational at best. It is one thing that flat earth proponents cannot provide a working model for the belief system, but these major problems undermine the belief system as well. And I'll present these 5 major problems to my opponent during the question and answer section of this debate. So that is my introduction taken care of in about 12 minutes. So I've got a couple of minutes left to go. So before I wrap up the introduction, I'll just point out to the listeners who might not be aware that I'm not a globetard. I'm not someone who promotes the heliocentric model. I'm not like Red's rhetoric or Mare's Zilla or these other turkeys. I'm not somebody who's here to attack you. I'm not somebody who's here to mock you during this debate. I'm simply here to explain that many of the arguments that you've bought into about flat Earth theory, they might not be as valid as you think they are. And there's nothing wrong with being wrong after time, and flat Earth theory is a very fascinating thing to look into. Certainly I feel I've benefited from looking into it. It's led me to go down the path of looking into the official model of heliocentrism and evolution and other things as well. And I've benefited from looking into flat Earth theory. However, eventually one has to accept that many of the main arguments put forward for flat Earth belief system are either not logically valid or not backed by enough evidence. And there's nothing wrong with being wrong. And it's my hope that after this debate and after some of the videos I've been uploading recently and some planning to release soon, that more people will realize that it's okay to get rid of the heliocentric model. It doesn't mean you have to believe in the flat Earth. So with all of that said, thank you for your patience. I'm all warmed up now, and I'm ready to get into the next section of the debate. I'll pass back to you there, Anthony.
Excellent. Now, it must have slipped by you when I said that an introduction was not necessary or relevant, and I put my argument. So, you get to put your argument?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, I know. So you missed a bit where I said right at the start, we don't need an introduction. So I gave my argument. Now I don't mind sitting back whilst you give your argument.
I don't know, Antonio, I pretty much wrote it down. Introduction times 2.
Yeah, well, I said we can skip it, didn't I?
Okay, well, on to rebuttal anyway, Antonio.
Well, I don't have anything to rebut because he's not put his argument.
Well, I've got plenty of flat Earth arguments written down, Antonio. I mean, seriously.
Yeah, John. John, do you have an argument to put other than what you just had in the introduction?
So I just explained that I don't believe that the flat Earth theory is actually a scientific theory. That's one point that I made. And then I want to explain that at best, what you can do is, by the process of inference, put forward a number of separate, discrete arguments that might lead you to infer that the Earth may be flat. However, I suggested to you and to the listeners that each one of those arguments is either logically fallacious and or not backed by compelling evidence. And then I pointed out that there are a number of major problems facing the flat Earth belief system. So there are 3 elements there. Now, if you don't want to rebut any of those 3 elements, that's fine. If you don't want to rebut those, that's fine. We can move on, because I'm more than happy to rebut all the nonsense that you've said.
That's okay.
Right, well, at this stage, I'll step in and say, you've agreed on the format. You've had your opening introduction as agreed. You've got 2 rebuttals.
Okay.
10 minutes each. So you've had 10 minutes, Antonio. You've had about 3 minutes so far. Just go for it. Rebuttal away.
Yeah, that's okay. So I just wanted to be fair to you, John, because that was your introduction. I wanted to make sure you didn't actually have a big, argument to put. So I put my argument. Now I will rebut yours. That's okay. Now, you say that the flat Earth is a theory. Do you know the difference between a theory and a fact, John? Okay, sorry, this is a rebuttal. You don't require to answer. Okay, so the difference between a theory and a fact is that a theory has to be supported by premises based on observations. Now, that's a theory. A fact are just observations of concrete objects, of a concrete event. Okay, these are facts, the difference between fact and theory. So the flat Earth is not quite a theory, it's more an observation of the facts, not then put together into some elaborate explanation. It's simply, there is no curvature, that's a fact. There's no, there are elements, there's no proof that says that there is curvature. there's no proof that says maybe the curvature functions in this other way. So it's not a theory. That's right. It's a fact. Now you say the scientific method is lacking from the flat Earth. I don't know if you're familiar with Sagnac or the Michelson-Morley or Airy's failure. Those are the scientific method actually being displayed. Now, those experiments were real. They were true. They're not invented. They're not conjured by flat earthers. These people were trying to basically determine where we live. So that's following the scientific method. So your claim that there is no scientific method supporting the flat Earth, false. There is scientific method behind the flat Earth. Now, you say that the flat Earth cannot make predictions of the celestial bodies. Well, the Mayans could predict eclipses. So could many other ancient cultures. Okay, and they lived on a flat Earth, didn't they? So, fortunately for you, there is evidence that ancient cultures could predict eclipses and the movement of the celestial bodies, and they were on a flat Earth. So there goes that one. So a belief system is only required. You said that the flat Earth is a belief system. Okay, if it was a belief system, then it wouldn't actually require any concrete facts. You know, there's a belief system propping up Gandalf's world, Middle Earth. You know, there's a big mountain with a volcano, and there's all of the background theory for it, okay, which is the Silmarillion, explaining how everything came to be. That doesn't mean that because there is a belief system backed up by a theory that makes it true. That's what we have with the globe. That's not what we have with the flat Earth. Now, reasoning and evidence. When you're proposing an argument, so you have an argument to make, and it's an argument, the reason you're making an argument is that there's no actual proof for what you're saying. If there was proof, you wouldn't require, you know, an argument, okay? So arguments by their mere existence are arguments of that which is not obvious, okay? The flat Earth is obvious. So I don't mean to say, you know, philosophy and logic and reason don't have a place. They do have a place. Like, for instance, to say there seems to be no curve, therefore, well, there's no curve, there's line of sight showing no curve, looks like there's no curve, maybe it's because there's no curve. Now, if you want me to put that in a more structured argument with the premises leading to the conclusion, well, I would simply say geodetic surveying shows no curve, plane surveying shows no curve, therefore there's no curve. And I yield the rest to you. Oh, no, sorry, that's a bit rude. On your stance, which is, you don't have to have a counter model. Now, usually in a debate, that's one of the requirements. You have atheists versus the religious, Christians, Muslims, whatever, two counterpoints. My point as a flat earther is that the Earth is flat and that it can be shown to be flat. So it can be defined as flat. Your point seems to be that it's okay to say, no, you can't, and just be a Mary, quite contrary. Now, if you don't have an opposing argument, then all you're really doing is saying no, and then just kind of saying no some more. That seems to me to be what you're doing. So I have a question to you, okay? Now, this is a question. You don't have to answer it. My question is, do you have a girlfriend? The reason for asking this question is that if you say, yes, you do, or no, you don't, doesn't matter, I can then claim that that's a theory if I take your stance, okay? You can demonstrate that you have a girlfriend, but I can still say, nah, not really. You have this girlfriend theory, okay? Just because you say theory after something doesn't make that something a theory. Okay, now I yield. Over to you.
Okay, so on to my first rebuttal of what Antonio said so far. So during his introduction, I noticed that he immediately mentions the globe. Then, of course, just then in his rebuttal, he wanted to get into this again, this false dichotomy between flat Earth and belief in the globe. And I'll touch more on that in a moment. Now, in terms of the actual proofs or claims of proof that Antonio provided in his introduction, here are the ones that I noted. The Bolivian salt flats, the Sagnac, Michelson-Morley, and Aries failure experiments, and ships over the horizon. Archimedes was a flat earther. Planes don't dip their noses. Gyros show no curvature, and something to do with the sun moving around a bit like an aeroplane. That's what I managed to get the first time around. If I've missed anything, I apologize. I'll address those in my second rebuttal. But let's just go through these really quickly. The Bolivian salt flats. So the claim, this is a good example. The claim here is that there's an area in Bolivia which is flat for a long distance or a long area, a big area, and somehow that proves that we live on a flat Earth. Now, there's a couple of problems here. Firstly, is it a logically valid argument to claim, even if it's true that there's this big Bolivian salt flat, that because there's one big area that's flat, that the whole Earth is flat? Is that a valid argument? I would suggest no, and here's why. If I could find a large area that was actually curved, could I then say, well, that part's curved, so we live on a ball? Or if I could find a large part that was concave, could I then say, well, I found a large part of the Earth that's concave, therefore the whole Earth is concave? Most people would say no, it doesn't follow. I would agree with them. So this argument, even if there was a Bolivian salt flat that was proven to be genuinely flat over a large distance, does that prove that we live on a flat Earth? I would say no. But then there's the next problem, which is the supporting evidence. I've heard many flat Earth believers say that the Bolivian salt flats exist and they've been proven to be perfectly flat. Proven by whom? When? Where's the documentation? That's what I would like to know. So that's a good example. Let's look at some of these other things as well. The Sagnac, Michelson-Morley experiment, and Aries failure, they all have to do with the rotation of the Earth, not with whether or not it is a ball or flat. So they're completely irrelevant to the argument that Antonio is trying to make. Let's move on here to the ships over the horizon. Interestingly, in the last few days, a number of prominent flat Earth proponents have come out with their own experiments with lasers showing that light can in fact bend when it goes through different mediums. Now, this is something that most of us already knew. You know, if you've ever been out in shallow water, you've noticed that the fish seem to be in one position, but they're actually not because of the properties of light refraction. So light bends. And so now that flat Earth proponents accept that light does bend, I'm not sure why they're still trying to use things like ships over the horizon as any argument for or against their belief system. Once we accept that light bends, especially over distances, especially when it goes through different medium, how can that be used as proof for or against flat Earth or concave Earth or ball Earth? Doesn't seem to make sense to me. I'm not sure how you can have your cake and eat it. If light does bend, then how can you still be using things like ships over the horizon or distances as an object, objects at a distance as proof for your claims? Planes don't dip their noses. This is another popular argument, especially with people like the globe busters. Firstly, there's a couple of issues here. Let's look at the standard form of this argument. The argument is that planes don't dip their noses when they're flying from one place to another, like a long-distance flight. If we're on a giant ball, so the argument goes, then they should have to dip their noses down. So therefore, the Earth must be flat, or something of this nature. Firstly, who is telling these flat Earth believers that planes have to dip their noses down in order to fly level? I suspect that many flat Earth believers don't even know what the term angle of attack means, but I suggest they look into it. Planes don't fly level by pointing their wings or by pointing their nose necessarily at 90 degrees. If you look into things like angle of attack, the Bernoulli principle, etc., then the lift that a plane gets is dependent on things, not only its wing angle and its nose angle, but its speed, all of these sorts of things. So whether a plane points its nose up or down or level doesn't necessarily seem to me to be proof of anything to do with the shape of the Earth. If Antonio has any more that he can add to that claim, I'll be interested to hear it. And then another argument has to do with gyros showing no curvature. So this argument goes something along the lines of mechanical gyros in planes are supposed to, by way of maintenance of angular momentum, conservation of angular momentum, stay at a parallel plane of spin, despite what the aeroplane itself might do. And since it does this over long distances during a long flight, then the Earth must be flat. But again, here we've got a couple of issues. Firstly, can any of these flat Earth proponents prove that these mechanical gyros are in no way impacted by things like friction forces? Can they prove that these mechanical gyros are not adjusted in any way by the pilots when they fly? I understand that people like Bob of Globebusters claim to be pilots, and so they use this appeal to authority of, well, I'm a pilot, I never adjusted my mechanical gyros, so this is how it is. And that might well be the case, but is that what Flat Earth believes are basing all of their beliefs on, the claims of people like Bob? Are these people doing their own research and finding out if pilots do indeed adjust their mechanical gyros? Do these mechanical gyros, are they affected in any way by things like friction forces, etc.? But then there is another issue as well. Are pilots flying purely from their attitude instruments in their cockpit? Because my understanding is that they don't. In fact, they use things like their altimeter to make sure they maintain level flight rather than their attitude indicator. So I think there's a number of assumptions that this argument is based on. Are they themselves verified by evidence? Hopefully Antonio can explain that one for us. He also mentioned something about how the sun moves around the Earth like a plane or in a plane or like the sun, or I'm not sure what he was saying there. Hopefully he can explain more of that to us. And he also said that Archimedes was a flat earther. Now, Archimedes supposedly lived 200 years BC, more than 2,000 years ago. I would like Antonio's proof that Archimedes existed, and I would like his proof that Archimedes was a flat earther. I look forward to seeing this. This should be interesting. And I think I've gone through all of his arguments that the Earth is flat. So I might have missed some. It'll be interesting if I have. Hopefully he can explain that to me. Now, with all of that said, I want to talk about this topic of a dichotomy. Now, some things are fair or honest dichotomies. Things like Antonio said, do I have a girlfriend or do I not have a girlfriend? Yes, that is a fair dichotomy. Either I have a girlfriend or I don't. But then there are things called false dichotomies, and these false dichotomies, or a false binary, is a logical fallacy, and it's where someone says to you, you've got to believe in either this or that, and they exclude other potential options. Now, here are just some of the theories of the Earth floating around on the internet right now. You've got the hubcap Earth model, which some people call flat Earth, but clearly isn't. You've got the concave or cell Earth model. You've got the stationary ball Earth model, or the geocentric Earth model. And, of course, you've got the spinning ball Earth model, or heliocentrism. There's just a few. So for someone to say, well, the Earth isn't this, so it must be this other thing, that is a classic false dichotomy, and you'll find many flat Earth proponents and believers using this false dichotomy because they know that most of their listeners aren't smart enough to realize that there's a logical fallacy involved. Now, most people listening to this right now, we're all in agreement. The heliocentric model is at very best based on a bunch of unfounded assumptions, at very best, okay? But it doesn't follow from that the Earth is flat. It doesn't follow. It logically doesn't follow. And if that doesn't make sense to you, I encourage you to check out my series, Thinking 101, on my backup channel, John the Bon Escher. I'll put it into perspective for you like this. If I said to you, I can prove that the heliocentric model is a lie, therefore the Earth is concave, chances are you would say, well, that doesn't follow. That doesn't really make sense. But that's actually what people like Antonio are doing, except they're saying, I can dismiss the spinning ball Earth model, the heliocentric model, therefore the Earth is flat. It's the same thing. It's logically fallacious. If the Earth is genuinely flat, and if Antonio can prove that the Earth is flat, he should be able to do that by proving the Earth is flat on its own merits. Now, earlier he complained about the debate topic. The debate topic was agreed to literally weeks ago. The debate topic was the Earth can be proven to be flat, Antonio in the affirmative, and myself in the negative. Now, Antonio said that usually in a debate, you have one group arguing one thing and another group arguing another thing. Actually, what you usually have in a debate is a statement and then an affirmative and a negative. And this was all agreed to weeks ago. The Earth can be proven to be flat, affirmative, Antonio, negative, John the Bon. And so far, if the best proofs that he have that the Earth are flat are things like Sagnat, Michelson, Morley, and Airy's failure, which have to do with the rotation, not the shape of the Earth. In other words, irrelevant. Bolivian salt flats, which he has no supporting evidence for. Things like the plane's nose or gyros, which I'm willing to bet he's got no evidence for as well. If that's the best proof he has for flat Earth, I think he's in a lot of trouble. And with that said, I will give back to you, Antonio.
Nathan, sorry, what's the next stage? Am I rebutting his rebuttal now?
Yeah, you're on to your second rebuttal.
Okay, so Sagnac, Michelson-Morley, and Aries failure. What they were doing was they were observing the world, okay? They found that the world is not spinning. True. Now, if the world is not spinning, it is static. Okay, so it is static. You say that's not proof of a flat Earth. That's okay. You ask for proof that the Bolivian flats exist. Luckily, I've got a screen sharing ability now. So let's see. Desktop. Okay, so let me see which one it is. Am I sharing, Nathan? Nathan, you've muted your mic.
Yeah, you're up and running. You're on you permanently, Antonio, so whatever you do will be up.
Okay, am I sharing, screen sharing?
As far as I can see, you are. Present to everybody.
Salar
Yes.
de Uyuni? Okay. These are the salt flats in Bolivia. Now, yeah, it's true. Wikipedia, you know, they could make it up. That's true. But then somebody would have to go and make these up, okay? So either these are all CGI, okay, or this is somewhere real in the real world, okay? Now, this is the salt flats, which flood, and when they flood, these happen, okay? You have these reflections. Notice that in the reflections, there's no concavity, and there's no funhouse mirror effect, okay? It's a flat reflection because, lo and behold, it's flat for 80 miles, okay? Now, if John is happy to say that flat over 80 miles means it could be curved somewhere else, that's okay, as long as you can find the somewhere else. Now, this picture here is showing the crests of these formations lit by the setting sun over to the right of the picture. And you'll note that it's not a case that some of these are lit and then some of them are in shadow because of curvature. So why is this? Because there's no curvature. So, and you'll find also that there really is no curvature. I will show the horizon right there, top of the screen, okay? There's no curvature. Now, you say there's no proof of no curvature. I've just shown you proof of no curvature. Now, the point for me asking what's your counterpoint, if your point is just going to say no, no, no to everything, you can now turn around and say that's not proof of lack of curvature. Okay, you can do that all day long. You could tell me you have a girlfriend and I could say you don't all day long. It doesn't mean that your argument is strong just by the mere fact that you can say no, it isn't. Okay, so I will now stop sharing. Now, back to your other points. So, talking to somebody who's a pilot is an appeal to authority. No, it isn't. It's an appeal to experience. Okay. Now you can turn and say, well, an appeal to experience is equivalent to an appeal to authority, because when somebody has an experience in a field, they can be classed as being an authority in that field. Now, I have experience of speaking Spanish. It does not make me an authority of speaking Spanish. Okay. But if somebody wanted to refer to somebody who has experience of speaking Spanish, they could refer to me because I do happen to speak Spanish, okay? Appeal to authority is not the same as appeal to experience. And second, you say there are all of these models online, including the globe, and you say that the flat Earth has no model. Doesn't that strike you as a little bit interesting? How all of these that have models don't have direct evidence, like I just showed you with the salt flats, okay? The reason we don't have a model is that we don't need one. We don't need a model to explain something abstract, because we can simply show the real world. That's why we don't need one. At some point, we might develop one, you know, for educational purposes, but we don't need one. Now, the cell Earth, the concave Earth, the globe Earth, the hubcap Earth, they're all models to explain things because they don't have direct evidence. I've just shown you direct evidence. Now, you question whether or not Archimedes existed. That's a fair question. I would say that there's sufficient evidence out there to say that he did. You know, from historical records, which could be doctored, to all kinds of other things. We do have the Archimedes screw, which would be strange if it was developed by somebody not called Archimedes to suddenly call it, you know, according to a non-existing character. Let me see what else. You talk about the sun not really having paid attention to what I was saying about how it moves across the sky. I was actually talking about a plane moving across the sky, okay? So your claim that the flat Earth can't predict things, null and void. In fact, everything that is predicted happens to be predicted on the flat Earth, okay? Your claim that appeal to authority is what people are doing when they're referring to a pilot on to whether or not it's keep your eye on the horizon or on the altimeter. You then have the explanation that just because it's flat for 80 miles doesn't mean that the whole Earth is flat. So it could be concave. If you found somewhere concave for 80 miles, you could then say that the whole Earth was concave. No, when you add the preponderance of flatness. So the flat oceans, the flat horizons, the flat salt lakes, the flat Kansas City, the state of Kansas, is it? The flatness that we have in the world. So for the world to remain a ball, which you're not saying, but I'm saying it's not a ball at all, therefore any features on the land are basically features of the land. But the flatness of the salt flats shows us flatness. Now, the flatness of lakes also shows us flatness, and the flatness of water shows us flatness. And Archimedes, the person who might not have existed, used flatness to have two teams of people making a tunnel from two opposite sides of a mountain range. Now, you can say this didn't happen. That's okay. I can say you don't have a girlfriend. I yield. Nathan, you're muted.
So my second rebuttal. We all good?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, second rebuttal. On you go, John. My apologies.
That's cool. So in the first rebuttal, I explained that during his introduction, Antonio didn't really present many arguments for the flat Earth. He presented a number that were irrelevant to actually proving flat Earth, such as trying to prove that the Earth is stationary, but doesn't actually prove the Earth is flat. I went through the ones that did seem to potentially be arguments for flat Earth, and I explained why I don't accept them. And so far, I don't think Antonio's really done much to validate his claims. I'll go through some of the things that he said between his intro and his rebuttals. Firstly, with the salt flats, I said, okay then, so if the salt flats do prove, if we can prove the salt flats exist, and if we just pretend for a moment that that would somehow prove flat Earth, what's your actual evidence that these Bolivian salt flats exist? And he gave us Wikipedia and a few photos is his supporting documentation. So I would ask the listeners to consider whether that's really enough evidence for them to accept that argument in the first place. My questions would be, who proves that the Bolivian salt flats are flat? Who proved the distances involved, the area involved, etc.? Where is this documentation? And who has scrutinized it? Those are my questions. Next, Antonio says that I'm just going to say no, no, no to everything, and he's tried to suggest that I am a cynic. Let me point out that I will accept evidence when it's presented, and the big problem with flat Earth believers and with heliocentric believers and with just about any belief that most people tend to have these days is they don't actually have any supporting evidence. And so when I say, hey, maybe this Bolivian salt flat might be an okay argument for you guys potentially, what's your supporting evidence? That's being skeptical, and it's being methodical, and it's showing an attention to detail, looking for evidence for beliefs. If people say no, you're asking for evidence that we can't provide, we shouldn't have to provide it, that's fine, but you have to understand that that means that you're putting forth claims that you can't substantiate with evidence, And so no honest researcher is going to take you seriously. And this is what I mean when I say that it's a belief system. It's a belief system that may potentially be substantiated by some arguments, but as we're seeing today very clearly, as soon as you ask for the evidence, there's none to be provided. So when I use the term skepticism, what I'm talking about is a method or a philosophy. When I call myself a skeptic, what I mean is that I won't accept claims without evidence and I won't adopt beliefs without evidence. That's what I mean by skepticism. Now, moving on to appeal to experience. Now, I asked regarding those plane arguments, the plane nose down argument and the gyro argument, what are your sources for these claims? Is Bob from Globebusters your only source? And Antonio's come back and said that his answer seems to suggest to me that yes, Bob is literally his only source on these claims. Now, Bob might well be a pilot. That could be true. He might also be a microwave engineer. He might have worked with satellites. He might have done all the things that he's claimed to have done. He might well have, but he's one person. If he's your only source of claims, if he's the only evidence that you've got is his anecdotal account of what he did while he was flying, his Cessnas or whatever, then do you think it might be worth looking in to see if there are other sources of evidence for these claims, especially about things like the gyro? If you're just going to accept that mechanical gyros are not affected by friction forces because Bob of Globebusters told you that or suggested that, are you really doing enough research into this to come up with a model that is, or a belief system that's backed by evidence? I would suggest that you're not. If Bob is your only source, from what Antonio said, it sounds like that is the case. Now, Antonio has at least been honest enough to admit that he doesn't have a model. He says because he doesn't need one, and this goes back to what I said in my introduction about this being a belief system. People like Antonio aren't trying to be scientific. They're not. They're not following the scientific method. At least Antonio admits that. At least if you read between the lines he says, we don't have a model because we don't need one. Now, without a model, you can't put forward predictions that can be tested. Now, Antonio said that the ancient Mayans were flat earthers and they could predict the eclipses. These claims might well be true. I would also like to see some substantiating evidence for these claims. But even if the Mayans could predict the eclipses, it doesn't mean that he can, and it doesn't mean that anybody on YouTube today calling themselves a flat earther can make any predictions. And as we'll see later on, things like, say, the South Celestial Pole and the Southern Cross constellation, people like Antonio and other flat earth proponents can't even agree on basic observations about the Southern Cross, let alone make predictions about where it's going to be tomorrow or the day after. If they can't even agree where the Southern Cross was yesterday, how are they going to make predictions about where the Southern Cross is going to be tomorrow? Yep, thanks, Nathan. 5 minutes left. So the point that I'm making is if you want to believe in flat earth, that's fine. There's no problem. The issue is a lot of people are pretending that they're doing so with scientific evidence or with rigorous research, and clearly that's not the case. Now, Antonio says with Archimedes, he says, I would say there is sufficient evidence to say that he did exist. That's maybe there is. What's the evidence? I would like to see the evidence. What is the evidence that Archimedes existed? What is the evidence that he was a flat earth believer? What you'll notice if you listen to one of the shows featuring people who call themselves flat earth believers is that oftentimes they make a lot of claims and very rarely do they actually point out to you where you can go and find the evidence to corroborate those claims. Archimedes might well have existed and he might well have been a flat earther. Where is the substantiating evidence to justify such a belief? That's what I'm asking for. And if the substantiating evidence doesn't exist, then why on earth would you believe in this stuff? Now, the preponderance. This is another term that gets used by certain flat earth proponents very often. The preponderance of evidence. We have a preponderance of evidence. Now, very few people seem to understand what preponderance of evidence means, but if we just use a general description of this term or this concept, it's the idea that if you're looking at a case, you look at a case, again, where it's either for or against, but let's just go with that dichotomy for now. You weigh up the evidence on either side. Now, so far in the first half of this debate, as I explained in my introduction, my plan was to simply evaluate Antonio's claims. And we've gone through them one by one, and it looks like he doesn't have a single flat earth proof that is both logically acceptable and backed by substantiating evidence. Not a single one, right? So on the preponderance of evidence, you take his side, which is nothing, then you look at all the problems with the flat earth belief system, which I'll be explaining in the second part of this debate when we get into the question and answer. and then the back and forth, because there are a number of phenomena observable, anyone can see for themselves, of our Earth and the heavens above that do not comport with the flat Earth belief system. So if you want to go down the preponderance of evidence route, that's fine. Look at the number of flat Earth arguments that are both logical and backed by evidence. So far, none. Then you look at all the problems with the flat Earth belief system, and you'll see as the debate goes on that that is quite a substantial amount. So with all that said, I'll give back to you there, Nathan, and we'll move on to the next part of the debate. Nathan, can you hear me?
Nathan, say hi. We can't hear you. What the? Mike?
I do apologise to the listeners. It looks like we're having some technical difficulties.
Yeah, John, if you don't mind, okay. So the Fourth Wall Mechanics is a show that Nathan and I do. So we don't require you to apologise to the listeners. I should be apologising to you. So I apologise to you. Nathan has lost his mic. Okay. So no, Nathan, you want to test? Yeah. Nathan. No? Okay, so we can carry on between us, John, if that's okay, until Nathan sorts himself out. So the next
that's
stage...
fine, mate. So we've gotten through the... There you go.
Yeah. So now it's my stage, my second rebuttal, is it not?
I think you've already had your second rebuttal. It went introduction you, then me, then rebuttal you, rebuttal me, rebuttal you, rebuttal me. So we've gotten through intro, rebuttal, rebuttal. And now we should be into the question and answer section.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Okay.
Now, you said that you wanted to have a 5-minute break before question and answer, and I understand that. So if you like, we can take a 5-minute break now.
Yeah, that works well, because then Nathan can figure out what's going on with his mic.
No problems. I'll be back in 5.
All right, cool. Nathan, you know your button is muted from here. Okay, and to anybody out there watching this, I hope you're enjoying it. I'm enjoying it. And I'm wearing pink. Not red, but pink. And it's to make the girls wink like this. So let's see. Let's see what Nathan is doing. Nathan, it's showing muted on your box. Okay, do you want to mute and unmute and see what happens? No, it's gone. Do you want to drop and come back? Okay, I'll wait here. And in the meantime, I will do a dance for everybody who's watching. Okay, this is a traditional Spanish dance. No, I'm not going to do a dance for you. Come on, what is this? Yeah, so unfortunately, I can't really address anything that John has said. It would be unfair, you know, to take up, to use this opportunity to basically, you know, criticize things. But it's, I'm enjoying this. Don't know. Oh yes, I will take this opportunity to explain how the people who made the footage for National Geographic, which was not the footage of the cars reversing, okay, but the footage of National Geographic showing the clockwise motion of the northern stars was reversed. They have admitted to this. They said it was for aesthetic purposes or artistic purposes. That's fine. It does bring into question any star footage that we see, although obviously I don't doubt that there is bona fide star footage out there, but it makes it difficult to say which is which unless you've recorded it yourself or a very trusted person. So luckily there is somebody very trusted in Australia who would be capturing the star motion. And I will show an update as and when. It would be great if John had some footage of the southern stars pointing south. That would be really good. But, you know, and I do actually really value, I know there are people out there who have a little bit of a problem with John because of his argument style and whatnot. I think that his role is actually very important in that it forces the argument to be tighter. There you are, Nathan. You have your
back. I just needed to drop out and back in again, thank God.
Yeah, so just to wrap up, I was explaining to the viewers that the footage shown in my last video was literally reversed. That's not the footage with the cars. It's the footage from the Auroras. Okay, now...
well, you're kind of, at the moment, Antonio, you're kind of taking this 5-minute break to, you know, go to the loo or something. We can have dead air for this 5 minutes.
Oh, are you sure?
I would say so. It's not really appropriate. I couldn't hear what was going on, but there we go.
Well, I was going to start telling my jokes and things, but okay, I will.
Jokes, fine, no problem.
No, I'm kidding. No, it's fine.
Take this opportunity. You know,
I would go make a cup of tea. I would make a cup of tea.
Exactly. Take a couple of minutes.
The next stage is the question and answer, isn't it? Question, answer, then he questions, then I answer, and back and forth. Am I right?
Correct. So the next stage will be question and answer, only addressing topics that you have actually brought up.
Right.
So
excellent.
That's it.
Excellent. Okay, so I shall be back shortly.
Superb.
And for the people out there, don't objectify me, okay? It's not nice.
Are you there, Nathan?
Ah, you're still there, John, are you?
Yeah, mate, I'm still here.
Excellent stuff. You've had your 5-minute break.
So, yeah,
now Antonio's having his after presumably taking full advantage of that little interlude. I don't know what happened then, so my apologies to the audience. I know JLB's done a very good job. Antonio's done a very good job. Hopefully you're all enjoying the debate. We'll have a short interlude while Antonio grabs himself a brew. But yeah, we've never actually spoken on a hangout before, have we, John?
Not on a live hangout, Nathan, so yeah, the pleasure's all mine.
Yeah, I mean, we've obviously spoken beforehand, off air, but yeah, this is a pleasure to have you on. So yeah, how are you feeling now that the initial stages have been put to bed? We've got our notes down on what we're actually going to be fighting about, if there's any real fighting to be done. I know we're all gentlemen here.
Well, I think there's probably some lessons to be learned in terms of preparation prior to a debate, and perhaps next time one of these is organised, it might be worth bedding down not only the topic but also the format maybe a couple of weeks in advance, or at least a few days in advance, rather than sort of doing it ad hoc at the start of the show. But other than that, look, a few technical difficulties or what have you, but more or less it's kind of gone as I would have expected, and hopefully some of the listeners are getting something out of this. I've actually heard that some people are being banned in the live chat for defending me, which would be a shame if true.
Well, I hope not. I mean, there are sparse moderators in my chat room, I'll be honest. So if you're getting banned, or if people are getting banned for defending you, that's pretty disgusting. You're here, and so far, I don't think I've had to interject once, have I? So, you know, there's been
no talking over it. No.
Yeah.
No, I think we've been fine, myself and Antonio. But the live chat, obviously, a lot of people who watch these kinds of things live, the live chat, you know, is one of the main reasons they pop in, and it would be a shame if people were being banned simply for defending me or for disagreeing with the flat Earth belief system. I hope that's not true.
Well, hopefully not. But ultimately speaking, this is a win-win situation. We're ultimately all looking for truth here. So by sharpening each other's wits, debating what is and isn't real, nothing wrong with that as far as I'm concerned. Everybody should be really happy. And I've been watching the chat. Everybody has been happy. I don't know what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Looks like people in the live chat are now saying that that didn't happen. So who knows? You get different stories from different people, don't you? But anyhow, yeah, so the flat earth, look, what I wanted to do, and this is another thing we probably could have gotten right if we'd sort of planned ahead, and I put my hand up, obviously I could have been more sort of fervent in trying to get everything sorted ahead of time, so all three of us have to sort of take some responsibility for this. I also wanted to just give like a brief bio to the listeners, because I think a lot of people who've gotten into flat earth belief over the last 6 months, they're not really too sure what took place, say, this time last year, and the fact that things were very different back then. And so what happened initially, especially around the time of the Ball Less Skeptic Roundtable, was that a lot of people who had previously been interested in researching things like the fake media events like Boston bombings or Sandy Hook, whatever, people who were used to the idea of analysing evidence had then begun analysing the heliocentric model and considering the flat earth theory. 12 months later, a lot of people who are here have zero interest in analysing evidence or research. They're here for other reasons, whether they might be spiritual or philosophical or social or what have you. So I would have liked to have explained to some of those people who've joined this little so-called movement in the last, say, 3 or 6 months, just explain that I'm not a globe believer or a heliocentrist or a globe-tart or any of these words they might want to call me. I'm actually someone who was one of the earlier people to look into this and one of the earlier people to do live shows back when it was still more of a taboo in this scene than I guess it is now. And I think some of them might benefit from understanding that people like me, we're not their enemies. You know, we're just here to look at the evidence and see what the evidence says, and that's what empirical investigation is meant to be all about.
That's what I was just saying as Nathan came on, that the role that you play, you do play a very important role, which is force people to tighten their arguments or neaten and trim the fat off the proofs. So yeah, I do actually really value that. Should we get into it?
Well, you've started
yeah.
off. I mean, this is a Q&A. You may as well go straight into it, guys. I mean, you've started off nice and gently, which is always polite and great if it's a Q&A session. So let's hope it carries on as it started.
Okay, cool. Is it okay with you, John, if I address a couple of points you made, which are a little bit misleading?
Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you say that my only source for this gyro is one pilot, and that's Bob, and therefore that is not valid. That's not my only source. That's an error in your logic to conclude that because I haven't listed my sources, it means that I only have Bob as a source. My cousin is a globalist pilot, and my uncle was in the RAF, in the Royal Air Force. So no, I have 3. But, you know, just to highlight that, to conclude that there's only Bob as my reference is illogical. Now, you say that about belief systems, okay? Now, belief systems require models. Without models, they can't convince people.
Antonio, it's a kind of Q&A session, so you've got to kind of state a question and let him give an answer.
Yeah, true. These were just the points that he made which are misleading, so I just wanted to redress these, and then we can get into the questions.
Well, can you just get into the questions?
Okay, so, John, you said that, would you say that it's true that belief systems require models to convince others?
Would I suggest that belief systems require models to convince others?
Yes.
Well, clearly they don't, because many people have been convinced by a flat Earth belief system without a model. So people can be convinced of anything, really. Can't they? I mean, many of the people in the audience right now are evidence of that.
Can you show...
well, can JLB get a chance to ask you a question? Is that a possibility?
Sure. Sorry, yes.
So with that said, obviously Antonio started this section with a rebuttal, so I'll just quickly reply to his rebuttal.
No, can you not? Come on, let's not be petty. Can we just stick to Q&A, JLB? Let's just get him. Come on.
You just in the interest of fairness, like for 1 minute, let me just make 1 point, 2 points.
Okay.
Firstly, the mechanic. Firstly, okay, you say that Bob's not your only source. Cool. Where's the evidence I can go and check to find that mechanical gyros are not affected at all by friction, for instance, with the gimbals? And then you say that your other source is your cousin who's a pilot. That's terrific. So that's one other source, which is largely anecdotal. Is there any objective place where we can get more information on these things, where the listeners can go and do their own research? And It'll be interesting to know if your cousin is also a flat earther like yourself. But anyhow, that's my quick rebuttal to your rebuttal. Now let's get into the proper Q&A, shall we? So I did mention at the start in the introduction section that what I was going to do in the Q&A was point out some of the big problems that face the flat Earth belief system. Let's look at the first and most obvious one, the South Celestial Pole problem, or the Southern Star Trails problem. Now, it is observed that stars in the Northern Hemisphere appear to rotate anti-clockwise around a central point close to Polaris, whereas stars in the Southern Hemisphere appear to rotate around a central point close to Sigma Octantis. The stars appear to make one rotation each day. The question is, how can the flat Earth belief system possibly account for this?
The answer is this. You have pointed out that the flat Earth belief system has no model. Now, we're discussing the flatness of the Earth, not the shape of the heavens. So you're now asking a question about a model that you've already expressed doesn't exist. So unfortunately for you, I can't answer anything about the stars or the heavenly bodies.
Okay, so we can just all be clear then that you have no way of explaining the two celestial poles, and you're happy to admit that openly.
I'm happy to admit that that doesn't actually describe the shape of the Earth. So the shape of the Earth describes the shape of the Earth, what the heavens are. Do you know, for instance, can you explain to everybody what the sun is and where it is?
No, I can't.
Okay. So that's all right then.
I'm not the one trying to prove that the Earth is a certain shape. So I'll move on to the next question then. You're on the public record as recently as within the past week denying the existence of the South Celestial Pole, stating there is no southern point where the stars rotate. Is this still your position?
Nope. But again, like I said, the footage of the reversed footage of the auroras showing clockwise motion was reversed. They have admitted to this. Now, I should have an email, but my colleague hasn't passed it on to me, explaining that they reversed it for aesthetic purposes. Now, obviously they reversed it because they do spin anti-clockwise. But your question, which is it still my stance that there is no southern celestial pole? My stance is, like yours, I have no idea. I have never been there. You live there. Is there a place around which the stars rotate from Australia?
Are you asking me, can I see from Brisbane the stars rotate clockwise around the South Celestial Pole?
Yes.
Of course I can.
Oh, okay. So that's anecdotal, is it not?
It is anecdotal, and there's also plenty of objective evidence for that others can find as well.
Cool. So that was my next question. So what's yours?
All right, cool. So we've already discussed the South Celestial Pole problem. You've been honest enough to admit that you can't explain them. That's good. Now let's move on to the Southern Flats problem. It is observed that people can and do fly internationally from South Africa to Australia and from Australia to South America in approximately 9 hours and 12 hours respectively. How can the flat Earth belief system possibly account for this?
Didn't we agree that we would ask questions on what the other person has said? And not on topics that have not been mentioned by the other person?
No, we never agreed to that. I pointed out in that email that I sent to you that
I'm pretty sure we did.
Disallow.
I can look it up if you want, but I'm pretty sure that was part of the stipulation that the topics were only part of the topics that were brought up in the debate.
Well, that's okay.
So the way it was explained, the way it was explained, and I'm more than happy to release all of the emails to anyone who wants to look at them. The way it was explained that you have an introduction.
No, sorry,
the
John, we discussed it at the top of the show. We discussed it live. We discussed it at the beginning of the show.
And what did we? When did I say that in the Q&A we would not be asking each other questions about their belief systems?
We agreed at the top. Sorry, this is the only time I've been asked a question. Right. So at the beginning of the show, we agreed that the only things that would come up in Q&A would be topics that were raised in the debate. I've written down them all for that very reason. That's why I wrote them down.
No, I don't recall agreeing to that at all. Why would I agree to that? Why, if we have a topic, why would a Q&A not be allowed to address the topic?
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Let me explain to the listeners, just without interrupting me, let me explain to the listeners. The way it's meant to work is that the rebuttal section only rebuts what's been brought up in the introduction. That makes sense, all right? If Antonio doesn't bring up the horizon always rises to eye level thing in his introduction, how can I rebut him on it? It's not his argument. That makes sense. When you get to the Q&A, it's meant to be on topic. The topic is Antonio believes that he can prove that the Earth is flat. If he can prove it, he should be able to account for the phenomena that we observe, which is why all of my questions are based on observable phenomena. And I explained all of this in my introduction. And I'm more than happy to release all of the correspondence explaining all of this.
Brilliant. Now we all have it clear. So your question was, how can I address the point of flights in the south? Was that your question?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. I recently flew from Spain to the UK in the north. Okay. Now, the day I flew, there was a strike over France. I don't know if you're familiar with European geography. So between Spain and the UK, the south of Spain and the UK is France. And usually we fly over France. Now, on this actual day, there was a strike by the French air traffic control, and there were no flights allowed over France. Now, the journey took just as long as it takes any other time when we fly in a pretty much straight line over France. Only we didn't go over France, we went over Switzerland and Germany, which is twice as far, okay? But it took the same amount of time. So what's your question again?
So my question was, if it's been observed that people can and do fly internationally from Africa to Australia and Australia to South America in approximately 9 and 12 hours respectively, how can the flat Earth belief system possibly account for this?
Like I just said, planes sometimes fly faster, sometimes fly slower. Do you have any way to determine at what speed they're flying? Because if you look at radar tracking software, you'll see that some of these planes are flying at 900 plus miles an hour, which is not the standard flight time, flight speed. So that's how I account for it.
Well, is that your question, Antonio? Do you have any way of accounting for it? Is that going to be your question to John?
No, that's his question to me.
No, you've just asked him a question. You've asked him if he has any way of accounting for it. So
all right.
he either answers that question, or that's just a question that's left unanswered.
What? So somebody makes a question, and then both people have to answer the same question?
Unless you want to answer it with a question, which is what you've done. Excuse me.
Oh, excuse me. I didn't realise I'd done it with a question. So if there's a question there, John, feel free to answer it.
Oh, I thought you were being rhetorical with your question, but it sounds like your answer is that your belief system can account for it by assuming that the flights are going faster. Of course, based on the azimuthal equidistant map, it would appear, or just based on the distances that we believe are between these points, those planes would have to fly at greater than the speed of sound. So are you suggesting that when people jump on a plane, just a regular commercial plane to fly from, say, Johannesburg to Perth, that they're actually jumping onto a plane that can go above the speed of sound?
No, but I'm also not suggesting that planes fly directly from Perth to South Africa or South Africa to Perth. I have no idea. I have no experience of those. Do you?
Yeah, I flew directly from Johannesburg to Perth. And what's interesting is that, I'll give you an example, for instance. The leading flat Earth proponent, David Weiss, is on public record as stating that if it could be proved that direct flights from Australia to South America exist, it would, and I quote, prove the Earth is a ball, crush the flat Earth model, shatter the flat Earth explanation, and change everything because there are no shortcuts on a flat Earth and the flights would be impossible on a flat Earth. And what I find interesting is how with a lot of these flat Earth proponents, they'll deny the existence of certain things, and then when the existence is proved to be true, they'll then somehow pretend that they'd never denied the existence or never admitted that the existence of these phenomena would destroy their belief systems. So you seem to be suggesting that you don't want to accept that the flights exist, but if they do, they must be done on super fast planes. Is that a fair summation of your position?
That's a fair summation of my position. Now, question, if a flight takes the same amount of time to fly a journey twice as long, would you say that this means that the flight is traveling at twice the speed for that journey? Let me make it clearer. 2 flight routes, one twice as long as the first, both taking the same amount of time. Is the plane flying the faster route flying faster than the plane flying the shortest route?
So if there are 2 planes flying the same distance and one gets to that destination...
Not the same distance. 2 distances. Distance A and distance B. B is twice that of A, and they take the same time. Would you say that plane B is flying twice as fast as plane A?
That would seem to be a logical inference.
Yeah. And that's what happened with my plane that I was on with my family and the pilot. And, you know, if you want verification, I'm sure I could look up the records and, you know, the flight number and all of those details.
And so that is proof that planes can fly at different speeds. What I'm asking you is, how can regular commercial planes fly above the speed of sound?
Twice as fast. And if the standard speed is 560 miles per hour, then twice as fast is 1,200 miles an hour. What's the speed of sound?
So you're claiming live on the air that you were going at 1,000 miles an hour on a recent commercial flight?
Nope, I'm claiming right on air that I did a journey twice as far in the same amount of time.
And what's the point that you're trying to prove? You're trying to suggest you flew at 1,000 miles an hour, aren't you?
You're trying to suggest that the first flight must be really, really slow, and the other flew at kind of average. So most flights fly really slow, and this time they had to fly at like normal speed. Either that or traditional flights, all the chartered flights fly at the standard flight speed, and when they have a longer journey to make, they fly faster. If you can find a logical way that the journey twice as long can be covered in the same amount of time, I would love to hear it.
Okay, so I've brought up the South Listed Pole problem. I've brought up the Southern Flights problem. And again, I'll point out that these phenomena were denied for a large period by leading flat earth proponents. Now they're either accepted or equivocated on, and they've got their explanations such as, we don't need to explain it, or there are Mach 1.2 flights. So I've brought up two. I'll let you ask the next question, Antonio. Fair's fair.
Okay. Would you say that a plane flying twice as far over the same period that a plane flies half as far is traveling twice the speed?
I thought we just went over that one, and I said to you, based on that simple hypothetical you just asked me, based on the simple hypothetical you just asked me, that would seem like a logical inference. Now, if we knew the speed of one of those two planes, we could then infer the speed of the other plane. But we don't know the speed of either of your flights. The question is, were either of them above the speed of sound, as flights would need to be on the azimuthal equidistant map for flights made between Johannesburg and Perth, which do exist because I took one, or between Australia and South America, which even people like Journalism and Bob now admit do exist. That's the question. Can you prove that commercial flights fly above the speed of sound? I don't believe that you can. So no, I'll move on to my next problem for you.
That wasn't a question. Was that not a question then?
Well, it was obviously a rhetorical question, wasn't it?
Oh, okay.
So you've asked the same question twice. I'll move on to a new problem for you. The circular moon problem. Now, it is observed that a full moon remains a perfect circle throughout the night rather than becoming or appearing to become an ellipse. So how can the flat earth belief system possibly account for this?
Can you ask the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, so it's observed that a full moon remains a perfect circle throughout the night rather than becoming or appearing to become an ellipse. So if you imagine that you've got a disk of some type, if it is above you, then during the course of moving from one distance to another, it won't look like a circle. Even if it starts off like a circle, it will become an ellipse. So what I'm asking you is, how can you account for the fact that the moon, no matter where you are on Earth, when it's a full moon, it remains a circle, the same circle, throughout the whole night?
Okay, so your question predicates a model of a flat moon, and you're asking me, can I explain the flat moon over the flat Earth? The answer is no,
I'm not.
I can't.
I'm not predicating a flat moon. I don't know what the moon is. I'm asking you if your belief system can in any way account for what we observe about the moon, no matter what you think the moon is.
Yes, it can. Now, my question. No, you asked me, can it?
No,
my answer is yes.
Come on. I mean, surely that needs a little bit of explanation.
Can you, and if so, will you? Yeah. Okay, so you're asking a question and then you'd like me to elaborate, yeah? Because that was a yes or no question. So I'll elaborate. Okay, so the moon is seen from different locations on the flat Earth, and the same portion of the moon being lit, seen from those different locations. Now, given that we don't know what the moon is, to explain or discuss or try to endorse certain dynamics of that moon would be arrogant at best. So my answer is, I can explain it in terms of it happens in the real world, and more than that, no. So,
did you have a question, Antonio?
Yes. Let me see. Yes. John, can you explain, define the difference between a fact and a theory?
Sure. So I can give my own definition. I'll give for you the textbook definition. I suspect that you want my definition. So
Both.
I would suggest that
both would be good.
All right, so I'll give you my definition off the top of my head. A fact would be something that can be objectively proven and verified more than once and by more than one person, I suppose. And a theory would be some sort of explanation given or used to try and understand the facts that are known, would be a general explanation that I might give. Now, the textbook definition, if you like, I can look it up on dictionary.com right now. Would you like me to do that?
No, it's pretty close to what you just said. So, yeah. Okay.
Oh. Do you have a question, John?
Yeah, so I've got a couple more. I had 5 that I wanted to get through. And just recapping, we've looked at the South Celestial Pole problem, which Antonio Missity can't explain. The Southern Flights problem, which Antonio explains with Mach 1.2 flights, which he can't prove. The circular moon problem, which he says he can explain, but he can't. Now we're moving on to the 4th one, which is the bottom-lit clouds problem. Now, it is observed that near sunset, clouds appear to be lit from underneath, and shadows can be seen which seem to rise upwards, i.e. from below the height of the clouds. How can the flat Earth belief system possibly account for this?
This is how. Okay, so you have perspective and the distance of the sun. So this happens when the sun is near the horizon, okay? So the clouds furthest away from that sun. The sunlight is something that we see on the Earth even on a cloudy day. Even on a cloudy day, you will get very faint shadows, okay? Now, those shadows are not cast directly by the sun because there's no direct sunlight. We're on the shade of the clouds. But the light, the ambient light, is falling on us sufficiently strong to show a shadow. Now, this is because light is bouncing. Now, when you say, how can they be lit from underneath, from a distant sun, it's because that sun is lighting the atmosphere, the ground, and that light is bouncing. Everybody knows that light bounces. That's what mirrors do, okay? Now, whether the light is bouncing off the ocean or it's bouncing from land, you'll have times where you'll see the light reflecting on the underneath of the cloud, and times in different locations where the light is not bouncing from the underneath of the clouds. Now, if it was direct sunlight because of spin, it would be bouncing on the bottom of the clouds both times, not due to elements such as reflectivity of the land on which the light is falling. So, my question to you, what is your idea about where you live?
All right, so I'm happy to answer that one, although I will, sort of premise this one by pointing out that regardless of what I believe, it doesn't make any difference as to whether or not you can prove that the Earth is flat, which is, of course, your task in this debate. But as for me, I'm more than happy to say I don't know where we live. I honestly don't know. I was brought up believing in the heliocentric model. I did pretty well at school, I would say. And I went to university and I thought I was very smart. And I fully believed the heliocentric model. I grew up, my favorite show when I was a child at a certain age was Stargate SG-1. I watched a lot of sci-fi movies. I believed all of that nonsense until about a year ago. And that was the point I was making earlier, was that the flat Earth belief system and this little flat Earth movement thing that's going on, even though I can see a lot of problems with it now, especially on the social side or the psychological side, what's happening to people, For me personally, I've got a lot from it because it's led me to go and look into the heliocentric model and realize not only is it based on completely unfounded assumptions, but they get away with it. And look how programmed people are. When you realize how programmed people are into the heliocentric model, you realize if they can be that programmed about this, they can be that programmed about literally anything. If you can convince people that they're on a giant spinning ball hurtling around the sun and they will regurgitate this and defend it, then you can convince them literally anything. So I've learned heaps from investigating all of this. But after, let me show you something. All right, you see this? What I did, these are books that I went and got printed and bound. In this you'll find 100 Proofs the Earth is Not a Globe. You'll find Zetetic Cosmology, Zetetic Cosmogony. You'll find Terra Firma in there. I've got 5 different books printed and bound. It's like $30 to get all of these bound. I read all of them. I've read the Flat Earth books. I've literally read books. Most of the people watching this right now haven't read a single book about the Flat Earth, not a single one. They've watched YouTube videos and watched live hangouts. They haven't actually read a single book on the Flat Earth. I have. I've got heaps from this. It's fascinating. It's fascinating even just from a historical perspective. So to answer your question, after all of this research that I've done, I still don't know where we are, but I do have in my mind what I think is close to a working model, and it does not involve a flat Earth. And perhaps at some point in the future, maybe the next couple of weeks or months, I'll release more about that. But for the purpose of this debate, all I have to do is show that you can't prove that the Earth is flat, and Antonio, and with the greatest of respect so far, I know that many of your devout believers will think that you have proven it, and that's fine, but I think the objective viewer will agree you haven't actually proven the Earth is flat. Now, on to my next question. So, the Ushuaia problem. It is observed that in the city of Ushuaia, actually, forgive me for the pronunciation there, Ushuaia, Argentina, it's considered the southernmost city in the world and receives well over 17 hours of sunlight for much of December every year. How can the Flat Earth belief system possibly account for this?
Well, you know, if the sun is orbiting further away and the light is bouncing from the sky, in the Gleason's map, I don't know if you must be familiar with the Gleason's map, the Acitis map, it shows you the shape of the light. And he was not a flat earther. He was just describing how the light works. So that's how I would describe it. Now, my question to you. You say that perfect mirror images over a distance of 80 miles are not demonstrable of flatness. Can you please explain to us how it's not demonstrable of flatness?
Okay, so I'm not sure I said it quite like that. What I pointed out was that there are 2 problems with the Bolivian salt flats argument. The first problem is the logical form of the argument, and the second is the corroborating or substantiating evidence. So let's look at the logical form there. The argument is something like this. Premise 1, there exists an area of perhaps 80 miles that is flat, therefore the entire Earth is flat. That's basically the form of the argument. Now, I could just as easily find a concave part of the Earth or a curved part of the Earth and then say, this part of the Earth is curved or this part is concave, therefore the entire Earth is, and no one would take me seriously because that's a ridiculous argument. It's logically fallacious, right? So the logical form is a problem. But even if you accept the logical form of the argument, let's look at the substantiating evidence. I asked you, and you're meant to be here proving that the Earth is flat, what's your substantiating evidence? Even if we accept the argument, like if the premise leads to the conclusion, let's just, for argument's sake, go with that. What's your evidence to prove the premise, that this Bolivian salt flat is actually flat? And you said to me, Wikipedia and some photos. That's your substantiating evidence. So like I said, 2 problems, the logical form and the substantiating evidence. Not enough for someone like me to say, yep, that's a valid argument, that's a sound argument in support of flat Earth theory.
Just a second. The question was, how can you explain mirror images over a distance of 80 miles as being not demonstrable of flatness?
What mirror images?
The mirror images I showed. I can show them again if you like.
Yeah, please do.
Sure.
Should have some elevator music for moments like these.
Yeah. Okay, so am I sharing?
I'll just click share to everyone, and then you will be.
Okay, just a second.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So
there you go.
are you watching, John? Are you watching, John?
Yeah.
Okay, these are not my photographs.
Yeah, I'm watching.
These are in the Mail newspaper. Okay?
Which of those photos is 80 miles?
I don't know. You tell me. You tell me where you can see curvature.
That wasn't your question.
My question was, when you have mirror reflections, how can you explain that as not being indicative of flatness?
Those areas might be flat. But those aren't 80-mile photos, dude.
No, they're not. They're not 80-mile photos. Now, you see this lighting on the crests of these salt plates? Okay, on a curve, let's say this area here between here and here is of, say, a mile. Okay, this is lighting maybe a centimeter. Okay, the flatness here has to be very, very flat. So the curvature is missing from this area, and you'll grant that yes, the curvature is missing. Now, if your counter argument is there could be a concave plane.
Well, let's not speculate, Antonio.
No, I mean, one second, Nathan, because John's been able to add extra elements. So I'm going to say your response is that there could be a place on Earth that has an 80-mile concavity in it. Okay, then show it. That's my answer.
Well, fair enough. I mean, there's still... You've got a question about it being demonstrable. John,
yes.
Feel free to answer that question.
Okay, so the point that I was making, and I explained all of this in the introduction, which I understand some people in the live chat found was a little bit boring. This idea of talking about what is reason and evidence and logic and argument is a bit boring for some of these people. I understand that. But the point that I was making was that we can assess the logical form of an argument before we even worry about is it backed by evidence. Again, in doing so, we can find that some arguments are simply not sound. Sometimes the conclusions don't follow from the premises. So the point that I was making when I pointed out that if I could find a curved area or a concave area or a hubcap area, that wouldn't prove that the whole Earth is curved or concave or hubcap. The point that I was making was in regards to the logical form of the argument. I don't believe it follows that if you can find a relatively tiny fraction of the Earth that is a certain way, behaves a certain way, that can then be used to extrapolate across the entire Earth. So what I'm talking about there is the logical form of the argument. And again, I fully understand that some of these terms or concepts some of the audience won't be familiar with. Of that group who aren't familiar with it, some will now go and do some research and to look into these ideas. Others will just ignore it because it doesn't seem to help their belief system. That's entirely up to them. But all I can do is talk in terms, as I explained at the start, of reason, logic, and evidence. And so the logic that Antonio is using here, he believes he's got a little flat area, so the whole Earth is flat. It is logically fallacious. It's that simple. Does that make sense? Actually, don't answer that. It's a rhetorical question. All right, so I've gone through my 5 major problems that I wanted to put to Antonio. And just recapping then for the listeners, as I explained, my first job was to go through his actual arguments that proved, allegedly, that the Earth is flat. And I think I've demonstrated that in most, if not all cases, they're either logically fallacious or not backed by evidence. Now I've presented a bunch of problems for his belief system. And just recapping his answers to my 5 major issues before we move on to the open discussion.
Well, JLB, no disrespect, my show.
What are you doing?
We're still on Q&A. You've decided you've ended your questions. Antonio may have another question. You're on to your rounding up and summary. So, Antonio, have you got any last questions you'd like to ask before we conclude it, and then we'll move on to summaries and hopefully round out the show?
Yes. Logic aside, okay, but not ignoring logic, what evidence could you yourself be presented with that you could yourself see that would convince you that the world is flat?
Good question. So obviously the easiest way to prove the shape of something for most people using our senses, our empirical senses, would be observation. So if I could somehow see a photo of the Earth, a certain shape, a real photo that I believed was legitimate, whether the photo said it was a ball or flat or whatever, if I could see that, that would obviously be the easiest proof. Now, obviously, none of us have access to technology that's going to take us far enough away from the Earth to take such a photo. So I don't think we're going to find the definitive proof that would satisfy someone like me, but we can still make arguments from inference. And as I explained in my introductory section, I think that for someone like you trying to prove that the Earth is flat, that's the best that you can hope to do, is make that argument by inference. Now, people like Bob call that a preponderance of evidence. And even though many of his listeners seem to use that term or believe in that term the wrong way, there actually is a legitimate argument to be made that you can use a preponderance of evidence to point to one case being stronger than another. So if I had to choose between one model or another, then I'd go with the one that had the most sound arguments in its favor. But as I think we've demonstrated during this debate, I don't think you have a single argument that is both logical and substantiated by evidence that supports your belief system. If you had a few, I might believe in flat Earth theories being a legitimate, or flat Earth belief system as being a legitimate belief system about the shape of the Earth. And if people go back and listen to the Boiler Skeptic Roundtable, there are a number of flat Earth arguments which I now see are logically fallacious or not backed by evidence, that I actually did entertain, and to one degree or another even buy into 12 months ago when I was first looking into all of this. I'll give you an example. The horizon rising to eye level argument. I used to think that that was a decent argument in favor of the flat Earth belief system. And there were 3 or 4 that I thought were pretty good. I was like, well, how can anyone get around this? This is a problem. But as I spent more time investigating, I realized they were either logically fallacious or not backed by sound evidence. In the case of the horizon rising to eye level argument, I realized that its logical form, its 2 premises I no longer agree with. The first premise was that the horizon can be seen to rise to eye level at distances, say in an airliner. I've since realized that actually no one's provided me with evidence that you can show a 90-degree frame of reference and the Earth dropping below that, a set amount. I haven't seen that evidence. It might exist. But also realized the other problem, that this argument is premised on the notion that we would be able to detect that drop. And so in the case of an airliner at 40,000 feet or what have you, it's something like 4 degrees. And so people are saying, oh, I can't see the horizon drop from eye level. And I realized, even though I used to think that was a good argument, I no longer do. And this is all, people can see this on my channel, the Boiler Skeptic Roundtable. I used to think the horizon rising to eye level was a good argument. I no longer do. If there were enough arguments that I believed in, I might believe in the flat Earth belief system, but at this point in time, I don't think there is a single flat Earth argument that is both logical and backed by evidence. I hope that answers your question.
Well, no, yes, you would convince you.
Yeah, he did answer it. He said if it went high enough to a point to see the entirety of the Earth. So, which is fair enough, yeah. There would be no more questions. I think I already know
the answer to the next question, which is, have you got any more questions? Because at the moment, we're kind of veering into something that, again, wasn't necessarily agreed upon, which is just open debate. Do you two actually just forget the Q&A format and just an open back and forth for 10 minutes, or do you want to round out or summarise your arguments and then end there?
Closing statements, you mean?
Well, I'd be more than...
Closing statements.
Yeah. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to have open debate. That was what I proposed a few weeks ago and a few days ago as well. However, if you guys wanted to wrap the show up now, I'd be happy to do that as well. The ball's in your court.
Everything's good from me. Nathan, you're okay for...
Perfect. No, you guys go ahead.
Excellent. John, go ahead.
All right, cool. So, Antonio, you asked me what would prove that the Earth is flat, and I gave you my answer. My question to you is, do you have any doubts at all about your belief in the flat Earth belief system?
I don't have doubts on my belief system because I don't really have a belief system. I have experience of the world. I have experience of having a belief system on the globe. And then I have experience of using observation, simple observation, simply looking at Polaris and considering that the sun has just gone down and 12,000 miles round the equator, somebody else is also looking at Polaris. And they're not looking at Polaris over their shoulder. They're looking at Polaris at the same point that I am. So they're facing me on the other side of the globe, and they're looking up at Polaris at the same point. So I have observations like that. I don't require a belief system. Belief is what you need when you have no knowledge. And you must understand that as a philosopher. So To base all of your conclusions of the world on logic alone is an error, as Zeno demonstrated with his never-arriving bullet or arrow, Zeno's dichotomy of motion. Between 2 points, there's always a halfway point, and between that point and the target, there's an infinite number of halfway points. So logic does not render reality. Logic helps you to discern elements about reality. Reality renders reality, and your experience of it from observation, from actual experience, empirical experience. So I have a question for you. Yeah, so I have a question for you. You looked into the flat Earth, and at some point, something jarred with you that said, no, it isn't flat. It's not a globe, but it isn't flat. Are you now leaning over towards maybe it is a globe, but it's much, much bigger than we were taught? Or what are you leaning towards?
That's fair enough. That's fair enough. And look, I think we've got the formal part of the debate out. I'm more happy to stray off topic here. I'm more than happy to. I think it might be beneficial for the listeners. So I'll tell you that I'm very convinced that the Earth is not spinning. And I think it's the job of anyone who wants to tell us that the Earth that we're on is spinning at any speed. Whether you think that speed is 1 mile an hour or 1,000 miles an hour, it's your job to prove that, because our senses don't tell us that. Now, sometimes our senses can deceive us. Sometimes they tell us enough. However, we go with our senses as a first port of call, and then, if they're wrong, it should be proven some other way. So the burden of proof is on those saying that we're spinning, and I agree with you. If you want to take the Sagnac, Michelson-Morley, and Aries-Failure experiments on face value, they suggest that we don't spin. I used to take those on face value. I no longer do. I'm very skeptical of all so-called scientific experiments from the past. I'm very skeptical of all history. However, you can take those on face value, or you can just take your senses. Either way, I don't think that we're spinning. Right? So you and I are on the same page on that, and I think most of the people listening right now, we're all on the same page. But the spin is very different to the shape. Now, I'm still very open-minded. I asked you, do you doubt your belief system in the flat Earth, and you said that you don't doubt it? That's fine. Even the model that I've come up with, that I might release in the next few weeks or months, I still doubt it. I still thought in my head today, I can come prepared with all of my notes and all of my questions, but you might actually be able to prove that the Earth is flat today. That's possible. I thought it was unlikely, but it's possible. So I'm always skeptical, even of my own beliefs. If people go back and listen to the Boiler Skeptic Roundtable, I never called myself a flat earther. I never promoted flat Earth belief. However, I was more than happy to explain or defend certain flat Earth arguments which at the time made sense to me. I've already pointed out the horizon rising to eye level one. That was one that for a period there I thought was a good argument. I no longer do. Another one was the sun setting. To me, the sun setting is now a big problem with flat Earth belief system. However, the Eric Dubé explanation of, well, if it's like, I mean, you use the term carousel, he uses a different word, I'm not sure, like the swarm or something. If you go through a swarm, then the bugs on one side will look like they're curving away. At the time, I hadn't actually seen my own evidence that there is a south celestial pole. So I thought, well, it is plausible that it's one big plane. And then, so I thought that argument is a plausible one. So I defended it on the first episode of Boiler Skeptic Roundtable. Since then, I've seen the evidence of the south celestial pole, so I can see that explanation doesn't jive anymore. So I've kind of gone a bit off track there. What was I saying?
Okay. Can I just...
Forgive me. Well, I had a point. I did have a point there. What was I saying? I've forgotten it now. Oh, that's right. Yeah, so we're not spinning. Yes. I was open to the flat Earth explanation.
Cool.
The flat stationary plane, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, but if you don't mind...
I no longer think that's a good option.
Okay, if you don't mind me jumping in, you did say that I could have presented you with evidence that the world was flat, but when I asked you what would convince you, you said what would convince you would be to be taken up high enough to see a photograph of the entirety of the Earth. Now, unfortunately, I don't have that kind of... I haven't got my levitation boots, and I can't take you up, to see that. So it would be very difficult for me to actually demonstrate something to you at all, because the only thing that would convince you is me taking you high enough away to see. So no matter what evidence I presented, you knew I was not going to present that evidence. So you're saying that I could have presented evidence. I have presented evidence. There are people watching who have seen the evidence who go, yes, we see it clearly, but they're not using the filter of logic that you're using, which is valid, but only to a point. Zeno's dichotomy of motion, are you familiar with it?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it, certainly.
Yeah, so Zeno's dichotomy of motion demonstrates that logic is fallible. There are certain arguments which are logically coherent that still fail to demonstrate the real world. So Zeno's dichotomy of motion demonstrates that logic and reason has a limit. Now, if you're looking at the world through logic and reason alone, you're missing things. For instance, when I've shown the salt flats, I'm not saying this area is flat, therefore all the other areas are flat. No, I'm saying this area is flat and behaves like this. Reflections, mirror, no curvature. There's also the Nazca lines. The Nazca lines were actually excavated. The top of the mountain was excavated flat. And they pulled the excess, they dumped it off the sides, and then they designed the Nazca lines, the famous Nazca lines. Now, they made this flat. They had some system for figuring out when it was flat. Now, that system must have involved observation, not just mathematics in one area and a map going with instructions. It will have meant observation. The only thing that's going to really show, until somebody can go high enough to take a picture of the flatness of the Earth or the sphericity of the Earth, the only thing that's going to show you the shape of the Earth is the Earth itself. Now, if you say there's not enough Earth evidence to show it, then I'm afraid you came with a conclusion already that unless I take you up on somewhere high to show you, then you're not going to accept whatever I show you. I'm pretty sure there are other things I could have brought up, but you know, for brevity's sake, I didn't. I kept it to these, which are visual aids. I do have, if you don't mind me showing, something else now that I do have screen share.
Yeah, just before you do that, can I just respectfully disagree with the point that you made? I did say in the introduction that I don't think that the flat Earth belief system actually is a scientific theory. However, I did explain quite clearly that if you presented enough sound arguments in support of that belief system, that you could infer that the Earth is flat. So you could very well have brought enough arguments that would lead somebody to infer that the flat Earth belief system is a reasonable one. Now, even if you could have brought 3 or 4 really good ones, at best, I would have gone away thinking, actually, the flat Earth belief system is reasonable. I wouldn't have held it strongly because it had only been inductive argument, which I was glad that you touched on at the start. But you could have done that. And what I'm suggesting to you, and I understand you disagree, that's fine, is that all of these arguments put forward in support of flat Earth belief, like plane gyros or dipping their nose down or water always remaining level, they're either logically fallacious or not actually backed by evidence. But here's the best part. If I say to you, actually, your argument is logically valid, I just don't agree with the evidence, all you've got to do is provide the evidence, you see. That's the beauty of looking at the logical side of things. So if you come to me and you say, look, water always maintains its level, a flat level, the Earth, therefore, because the Earth is covered in water, therefore the Earth must be flat, that could be a valid argument, right? Then all you'd need to do is prove that water actually does always maintain its level. Now, I've seen some people doing tests, say, in a bathtub, and the water's level. That's great. But that's a tiny fraction of the surface of the Earth. I would expect something much bigger than that. Perhaps to start with, maybe something like 100 miles. Has anybody ever proven that if you take 100 miles worth of water, that it is flat, like literally flat for the entire 100 miles? If you could do that, that would be very strong reason. That'd be a good argument in favour of the flat Earth. On its own, it wouldn't be proof of the flat Earth, but it would be a very good argument in favour.
Yes. What about 80 miles? Would that be good?
80 miles. If you could, 80 miles. If you could prove to me that 80 miles of water is literally flat, dead level for 80 miles, then that would be, I think, a good argument in favour of flat Earth belief. I don't think it would prove it, but it would be one very good argument for it, right? Then you could start.
Yes, that's what I do with the salt flats, because they are 80 miles.
Well, the salt flats aren't water for a start, so there's the first problem. But second,
the reflections are on water. They flood every year in the rain season. They flood, and the reflections are on water. Now, if there were small crepuscular areas of land popping up, we would see them. We don't. So that's why I brought it up. It's 80 miles of flat water. Now, it's only 4 to 6 inches, but it's still flat water, hence the mirror reflections. But if you don't mind me addressing your point about inference, okay? Somebody can go to their local shops on a rainy day, buy a lottery ticket, win the lottery, and declare that they won the lottery because they bought it on a rainy day. They can infer that buying a ticket because it was raining meant that they won. It's a false inference. So there are false inferences. You can infer things that are false. So it's better to not so much rely on inference.
Yeah, so a couple of things there. Firstly, I agree with you. It's best, I think, generally where possible, to rely on deductive logic rather than inductive logic or inferences. I completely agree with you, which is why I'm saying, even if you can provide a number of sound arguments in support of the flat Earth belief system, it still wouldn't leave me walking away a strong believer, but at least you'd give me the impression that it was a reasonable belief system, which would be a good start, right? So I completely agree with you. I prefer deductive logic over inferential logic, and I think at best, the flat Earth belief system can infer that the Earth is flat from a number of arguments, or what Bob calls his preponderance of evidence. Getting back to the water, what you showed us was photos that you admitted was not 80 miles. Many of the photos were short range, a woman 50 meters away.
No, I'm not talking about the woman. I'm talking about the background. And there will be photos. Unfortunately, it doesn't tell you on each photo how far the most distant point is. But there will be photos of the actual 80 miles. But what it will show is that you can't see the land at the end because of the atmospheric blocking that happens. So, but how far they can see, you know, there's already missile instructors and various different people who say that they can detect objects 80 miles away. So it might be the case that on certain days with the correct atmospheric conditions, there are mirror images from 80 miles away, but they will be so small and indistinct that it would be difficult to capture on a photograph and illustrate it. So perhaps somebody with a telescope can show this. Yeah, it's a valid point that you're making. Now, if you don't mind me just, I'm not going to screen share, I'm just going to point out that Archimedes, who might or might not have existed, wrote, he didn't just say this, this wasn't reported by somebody else, this was in his papers, "Give me a place to stand on and I will move the earth." Now, if I'm moving a flagstone, I'm going to need a lever to move that flagstone, okay? But if I'm on a sphere and I'm saying place me somewhere else on some other sphere and have some other pivot points against which I can place the lever, it makes this sentence nonsensical. The reason I say this is this demonstrates that Archimedes was a flat earther, because he said, give me a place to stand on wherever outside of the earth and a big enough lever and I will move the earth. There isn't a logical conclusion that can be arrived at where he would say that statement and it not be flat.
All right, just let me respond to that one quickly. So did Archimedes speak English?
No, Latin.
All right then, so what is the oldest text, the oldest extant text that we have from Archimedes in Latin?
Ooh, do you like me to look it up?
It won't be more than a couple hundred years old, and what you're going to find if you take the time to look into where are the primary source documentations for all of these characters, whether it's Pythagoras, Archimedes, Ptolemy, any of these people, what you're going to find is that we don't have any extant works of theirs more than a couple hundred years old. And anybody who's read George Orwell's 1984 will be familiar with this idea that history can be rewritten as we're going. And this is, I've said to people before, the flat Earth thing is fascinating to look into, guys. I was the original ball earth skeptic. I coined the term, okay? Looking into flat Earth theory and questioning heliocentrism, it's fascinating, it's eye-opening, it's a lot of fun, okay? But eventually you realize this is child's play compared to some of the other things that are worth looking into, such as the fact that all of these characters, including Archimedes, they're fictional, they're make-believe. We've got no more evidence that they existed than we have that Jesus Christ existed. No offense to the people who believe that Jesus Christ existed, which maybe he did, but we've got no proof of it. The oldest extant works we have of all of these characters is at best a few hundred years old. And if you want to believe the accounts of someone who came 1,000, 1,500 years after the character they're writing about, fine, believe their accounts. To me, it's insane. It's insanity.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I totally agree. In fact, I think Eratosthenes was a collage of different people. But with Archimedes, yeah, true, he could be a collage of different people with different discoveries. But the claim that the oldest existing papers on Archimedes by supposedly Archimedes are only hundreds of years old. They weren't written on paper, which decays, as we know, over a period of only a couple of hundred years. They were written on hemp, and hemp lasts much, much longer. Okay, so especially hemp paper or papyrus that was created back at the time, which is a mixture of different elements that don't have the same chemical decay as the paper we have today. So there are parchments and there are writings that are thousands of years old, not just from, we have this Western-centric idea of the world, but we have writings in India which are written on their version of papyrus, which are thousands of years old. And we have other documents that are not about Archimedes that are thousands of years old. In fact, we have Roman records of the time, and they're thousands of years old, that still exist. Now, if you're saying to me, have you seen them yourself? My answer is no. But the truth is, I have never seen the Sahara Desert either. That doesn't mean that because I haven't seen it, it doesn't exist.
No, I agree with you. Just because you haven't seen it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That's not my argument here. My next question for you is, you say these documents or this hemp is thousands of years old. Okay, great. Who dated it and how?
Yes, so that's a really good point. So all that's needed is for those documents to demonstrate elements like calligraphy and how calligraphy has changed over the years. Now you can say, there's very good forgers that can do this. You know, they can back engineer the calligraphy of the time. The same with, I mean, it's not, we're talking not the same antiquity, but Da Vinci and Da Vinci's writings. So we do have things that were created by people that are hundreds of years old. How old is the oldest thing that was written on something movable like parchment? That's a really good inquiry. I can't.
Hey, Antonio,
yeah.
I've got this bone, and it's 66 million years old. Would you believe that, right? I found it when I was out digging, right? I just happened to be out digging.
Yes.
Would you know, by coincidence, I happen to be an archaeologist, right, or a paleontologist? Would you believe it? I just found this 66 million year old bone, and now I'm in all of the academic journals. And if you want to question how I dated that bone, what are you, a cynic or something?
Yes.
Can you see where I'm going with this?
I completely. Just because somebody says that something is a certain age, it's like, okay, how have you dated it? Carbon dating is only measure a certain amount of the carbon-14 element. So, yeah, I understand what you're saying, your query about antiquity. But there are other works that can show elements of antiquity. For instance, paintings. There are paintings, cave paintings. Now, people say, oh, these are hundreds of thousands of years old. I was like, oh, well, that's longer than our given history says. That, you know, caveman was there 12,000 years ago. What do you mean? Carbon dating, it's all nonsense. But there are elements that are true. For instance, how society, how communities are built on top of others. So, for instance, in the UK, in London, we have the actual foundations of the Roman Londinium way back when, but it's hundreds of meters below what we now call London. So there were people thousands of years ago building in the UK can be demonstrated because of what they built. Now, if what they built also contains written elements that later confer, say, Archimedes or Julius Caesar, then we can pretty much conclude that Archimedes or Julius Caesar did exist, rather than it be a fantasy of some stonemason back in the day. So there are certain elements that...
Can I just respond to that, though?
Sure.
Can I just respond to that, though, mate? Like, you're saying that you know that this town was built thousands of years ago. Again, we've got the issue of how do you know that? And I'm putting to you, and I hope all of the listeners go out and try and debunk John LeBon. I put to you that if you look into the source, the primary source evidence for anyone from history, you're going to find it doesn't go back more than a few hundred years. So with that being the case, how can we say that anything is thousands of years old? It might be thousands of years old, but if we're going to believe it, we should have substantiating evidence, enough evidence to corroborate it. And it's going to blow your mind. I'll give you another example, Plato, right? Because the idea is, suppose in 100 years they find the diary of Antonio Subarits, right? And it's a fascinating diary. Once a week he wrote about his new artwork, his new flat earth debates, blah, 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 right? Primary source, okay? If we accept that that's your diary, then that's probably the best account that we're going to get of your life, right? But then we might say, hey, he's making some crazy claims. He claims that he lifted a 200-pound stone. Even though it's his diary, we better check with other sources. We find that Nathan Oakley, in his diary of the same date, I met a man today, he lifted a 200-pound stone. So they're starting to build up evidence that might suggest that your stories are true, okay? You need corroborating claims from other people. That's how we're meant to build up an evidence base for a story of history. This is the historical method. What you're going to find is that when you look into people like Plato, they all go back to one or two sources from a couple hundred years ago. All of them. They're all make-believe characters, my friend. So when you say that a town was built a couple thousand years ago, I say maybe it was, but what's your evidence? And if you're being honest, you don't have any. Now, that might be because it exists and you just haven't looked into it yet. That's fine. But if you look into it, I'm willing to bet any amount of money you're going to find there's no primary evidence from that time that we can prove is from that time. It's that simple. And to me, that is way more interesting than the shape of the Earth. And I know that many of the listeners are like, no, the shape of the Earth is the most important thing. Maybe it is. It was to me a year ago, but then I moved on. I'll give you an example. Eratosthenes, okay? Eratosthenes did not prove the circumference of the Earth, okay? For two reasons. Firstly, the alleged method that he did it, he wasn't even on the same longitude, right? You look at the cities of Alexandria and the other one he was supposedly at, they're on different longitudes. So even if he existed, there's no way that he proved the circumference of the Earth using sticks and shadows, among other reasons, right? But that's not why Eratosthenes didn't prove the circumference of the Earth. The dude did not exist. We cannot prove that he existed. I should watch my words there. Maybe he existed, we just can't prove it. But to me, if you can't prove he existed, then there's a good chance he's just a fictional make-believe character, okay? To me, what's more interesting about Eratosthenes isn't that he didn't prove that the Earth is a certain circumference. What's interesting is he's passed off as being a real figure of history when you can't actually prove that he existed at the time we thought he existed. You see what I'm trying to say here? And this is one of the...
I love the point you're making, John. Sorry I don't mean to hijack it, but I love it. I have these books here, Diogenes Laercio. I've actually made videos. I'm in a running battle with one of my globalist friends who says he was real and there's proof. And these books are two of the oldest books, not these physical ones, but the original ones, with the preeminent philosophers of Greece. And Eratosthenes was a philosopher, and he's not listed in these. There's no listing for Eratosthenes whatsoever. It does say, according to Eratosthenes, this person, because Eratosthenes apparently compiled his own book on the illustrious lives of the Greek philosophers, but it's all a reference according to Eratosthenes, but no mention of Eratosthenes himself being a philosopher or having measured anything, doing any cartography, nothing whatsoever in these. None at all. Just a reference to a person called Eratosthenes, a librarian at Alexandria. And whether the university or the Library of Alexandria was real or not is also a moot point.
Right, I'm going to interrupt you guys at this stage and say, at this point, I'd like you both, because we're still very much on flat Earth, but to bring it to fine points.
All right, okay.
Round out your arguments, summarise your points, and then we'll thank the viewers. I think everyone in the chat will agree it's been the most polite and civil debate ever, so fantastic. Yeah. But yes, if you keep it on topic and round out your, is it flat or is it not flat in the case of JLB, I think, Antonio, you had the floor first initially, so if you can go first and round out your argument, please.
I don't have to go first. If John, if you want to go first, I don't mind.
Well, it's normally this that the person who presents first also finishes first, but I'm happy if you want me to. And I should say also, a lot of listeners, or someone in the comment section just pointed out, it's very late where you guys are. It's about midday for me, but it's like 4 in the morning or something for you guys. Yes. So thank you heaps for putting the show on at this time. I was flexible with my time. You guys wanted to go late your time, but I think you've done really well given the time that you're up. It's ridiculous, especially to be talking about these kinds of topics. So just to summarise, I said in the intro, and it might be worth people going back and listening again, my plan today was threefold. So firstly, establish that the flat Earth belief system, it's not a scientific theory, and some people don't even pretend that it is. It is just a belief system. Now, belief systems can still be valid, they can still be reasonable, they can still be useful. In the case of the flat Earth belief system, to be reasonable, somebody like me, it would need to have a number of supporting arguments. Each of those arguments would need to be sound. And so I went through the list of all of Antonio's arguments in favour of the flat Earth belief system. We looked at things like plane gyros, we looked at things like the nose pointing down on a plane, we looked at things like this, and I explained why, in my opinion, in each of these arguments, every single one of them, they're either logically fallacious or they're not backed by substantiating evidence. Now, in the case of the ones that are not backed by substantiating evidence, the flat water argument being a good case, all you need to do is find substantiating evidence, and I will agree with you that's a good argument in favour of the flat Earth belief system. Antonio has suggested that believing solid flats when they've got a little bit of water on them, there's 80 miles worth of flatness. That might be true. I'm more than happy to see corroborating evidence for that, although I'd point out that a single photo taken from a single vantage point won't prove that. Things like Ryan Mullen's forced the line suggestion, that is more in line with what I would think would be genuine evidence. If you could find some kind of physical or mechanical way to prove, like with a flat line, prove that water stays at that flat level, that might be a kind of proof. So I believe, with greatest respect to Antonio and other people who have his beliefs, many of their arguments in favour of the flat Earth inference are logically fallacious. Of the ones that are actually logically valid, there's not enough substantiating evidence to believe in them, which is why I don't subscribe to the flat Earth belief system. And then I moved on to show why there's a number of problems facing the flat Earth belief system, such as the South Celestial Pole, which Antonio at various times says does or does not exist. Other flat Earth believers have said does or does not exist, does fit into their model, doesn't fit into their model. We looked at the South Celestial flights, and I pointed out those quotes from my old mate David Weiss, the Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole, who about 12 months ago, he was saying, the existence of a flight between South America and Australia would destroy the flat Earth belief system. He's now still saying that the flat Earth belief system is legitimate. I think it's well worth people considering what's been said in the past. Are people being consistent? These people you want to trust, are they being consistent to their own words? I would argue that in many cases they're not. Whether or not they're good people, whether or not I'm a good person, makes no difference. It's the arguments, it's the evidence that should be important. And I think if people look at the arguments objectively, they'll find there are many arguments against the flat Earth belief system. South Celestial Pole was one that we looked at. Southern flights, we also looked at the moon problem. We looked at the Ushuaia problem, and there was another one there as well. So in 3 stages, what I've done today is demonstrate flat Earth is not a scientific theory. It is at best a belief system. The arguments in support of it are either logically fallacious or not backed by substantiating evidence. And then there are a number of problems that face the flat Earth belief system. I hope that people have gotten something from that. Me personally, my favourite part of this has been just chatting with Antonio those 15 minutes about how history is fake. I don't actually think that Antonio and I are that different. We both clearly are interested in esoteric topics. We both clearly don't accept the heliocentric model. We've probably got more in common than we have in opposite from one another. And yet the fact that I don't believe in the flat Earth belief system, the fact that I criticise certain arguments, I'm even willing to criticise certain flat Earth prominent people or leaders or whatever you want to call them, that makes people see me as an enemy or as some kind of person to be attacked. I would argue that every time that someone who has more in common with you than has in disagreement with you, every time you attack that person, you're probably stopping whatever it is that you think that you're trying to achieve in the first place. And I think if more people focused on the lies of scientism rather than trying to defend certain flat Earth leaders or certain flat Earth arguments that deep down they probably know they can't actually prove, we probably will get a lot further. And so I still see a lot of hope for most of the people who believe in the flat Earth belief system, the ones who are looking at things empirically, doing their own research, etc. They might be a minority, but they can achieve amazing things because there are so many lies to be uncovered. And Tony and I covered just a couple of them later in this part of the show. Those of you who aren't interested in the research or the evidence or the logic, those of you who found my introduction monologue boring, there's probably not a lot of hope for you in terms of research. You're here for the feelings or what have you, and that's fine. If the flat Earth belief system makes you feel good, I'm not going to try and take that away from you. I don't go into Mormon hangouts and explain why I think they're maybe not based in their beliefs and evidence. I don't bother those people. What you have to understand is that 12 months ago, many people like myself got into this through the research, and that's why we still take issue with some of the things that are put forward as fact that are clearly not fact. So thank you for your attention. Thank you to Antonio and to Nathan. I know there were some technical difficulties, but I think there's been plenty from this show that people can take away from it. I've enjoyed it, and for those who are interested, in about 40 minutes time, 1 p.m. Brisbane time, I'll be doing an after show on my channel, John Extra. I'll post the links to that in the chat in about 5 or 10 minutes. You can see me there, and I'll invite a few of you on the show. So thanks again, Nathan. Thank you, Antonio. Thank you to the listeners, and I will see you all next time.
Almost to the second.
Okay.
I got my 5 minutes there.
Okay.
To the second.
Now,
Antonio, if you want to round out your "the Earth is flat" argument, you've got 5 minutes.
Okay, so John's main point is that the flat Earth is a belief system, and somehow it's a belief system without a model. Models are required for belief systems to convince people. Without a model, what's convincing people is direct experience of the world. Now, with knowledge and experience and inference, we've already arrived at the conclusion that you can infer that you won the lottery because you bought the ticket when it was raining, but it had nothing to do with you winning the lottery. So inference is not quite a solid, valid strategy. Now, belief systems require models, and reality does not require a model in order to convince people that they're in reality. But there are times when experience will render a certain knowledge that without a model is still true. For instance, there's a case of the village in Canada where the Indian elders pointed out that when there are many mice, the children who play in the field will come with a cough. Okay, now, this was their coherent argument, which is an observation that when there are many mice running around the village, the children who run around in the fields get sick. Now, the reason the children get sick is that the fields have been fumigated, which is the reason there are many mice, because the mice have run out of the fumigated fields. It's a valid conclusion that mice running around means children running in the fields will develop a cough. But the explanation that it's because the mice are running is not there. That's not part of the explanation. The explanation is simply when there are many mice running, the children in the field. So to infer that the elder pointing this out is saying that the reason the children have the cough is that the mice are running is false. It's a false inference. They're similar as buying a ticket when it's raining and winning the lottery. Now, John, I said it earlier, John's stance is critical, to be honest. It's critical for people to hone their arguments rather than just have weak arguments or fallacious arguments. Now, he did criticize David Wise for having said something some time ago and having not suddenly said, oh, that's no longer true. The truth is, we're all prone to error. We can all err. I've erred. John believed the flat earth. He no longer does. So either he erred back then when he believed in it, or he's erred now when he no longer does. To err is human, you know. So Nathan is giving me gestures to say round it up. So I will like to thank John. I would like to convince John that yeah, he's right. We would get on if we were in the same town. We would enjoy each other's company because he's a cool guy. He's a sharp one. But in terms of the flat Earth, is it flat? Can be defined as flat? Yes, it can. Yes, it is. That there are problems or questions and mysteries are just a symptom of the fact that for the past 500 years we've been looking in the wrong direction, looking into maths and theories rather than into the real world. Okay, so with that, I will say thank you very much for watching. The world is still flat, and it has nothing to do with whether you believe it or not. It's got to do with the actual flatness of the world. Thank you.
Well, gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure. So, John LeBon, if you can, I don't know if you want to pop your camera on just so you can wave goodbye to the very, very tolerant audience of our technical difficulties. And from me personally, Say again, John?
I was never a flat earther, bro. Come on, Antonio.
Oh,
We were getting
right.
along so well.
You were
Jesus.
never. So sorry, I misunderstood. You were never a flat earther. You left the globe, but you didn't see that if you leave the globe, it's a true dichotomy: either spinning and globe, or not spinning and not globe.
I feel terrible, Antonio. I know you're in the middle of your sign-offs, and you're one of the best in the business when it comes to signing off, Nathan. So I'll let you get back to the sign-off. I was never a flat earther. Thank you, everybody. The after show, the link's in the live chat right now. I'll be there in about 30 minutes. People are invited to join me. But thanks again, everyone. Thank you so much, Nathan and Antonio. And I'll see you all next time. Cheers.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you ever so much for joining us, John Le Bon, and to all of us who have joined us in this rather chaotic but certainly eventful debate on mechanics of the fourth wall. Thank you very, very much for being here. Thank you, Antonio. I've been Nathan Oakley, and I will see you all in the next video.